Chapter 114. Yu had been a servant in Marquis Qingchuan Fu ever since she was sensible. Because she was clever with her hands and beautiful since childhood, she was very fortunate to be chosen to serve in eldest young Miss Courtyard. In Yuru's heart, her family's eldest young miss was an especially kind and naive person. She was usually very amiable and approachable towards the servants, so Yuru had always been loyal and devoted to Shen Qingjing. When did things start to change? Yuru remembered that on a certain day in spring this year, the eldest miss had fainted from a cold. Yuru stayed by the bed all night, and the eldest miss woke up the next day. However, at that time, the eldest miss's eyes were cold and resentful, looking especially scary. It was also from that moment onwards that eldest miss changed completely. She became preoccupied and liked to daydream. Sometimes, she would even secretly curse at second Mississippi. Yuru didn't know what happened to eldest young Mississippi. She was just a servant and only knew to be loyal to her master. Whatever the master wanted her to do, she would do it with all her heart and soul. Therefore, on the day of the celebration banquet held for eldest young master, Yuru obeyed Chen Qingjin's instructions and unhesitatingly handed the tea that had been spiked to Qin Mian and Su Wan. After that, she separately led the two people to that remote wing room and knocked them unconscious for the time being. In fact, Yuru knew that doing this was wrong, but she didn't like eldest young Miss Su. Not only because that young Miss Su's character wasn't good, but also because Yuru herself had always secretly liked Shin Yushu. Therefore, even though she knew that she was personally destroying a person's innocence, Yuru still went against her conscience and did it. In the end, she suffered the consequences of her own actions. Her days in Duke Xinghua's public house were hopeless. The Wang family even sent people to watch over her, afraid that she would seek death. On several nights where she was tortured to the point where she wished she was dead, Yuru prayed in her heart for someone to save her. Even if that person gave her a knife and killed her immediately, she would be grateful to him and repay him in her next life. But now, Yuru was free. When Yuru changed into a brand new made uniform and stood in the rear courtyard of Marquis Jingning Fu, she still felt that she was in a dream. She was finally rescued by someone, and the person who had saved her from the abyss of suffering was not the eldest miss that she had always wanted, nor was it the hero in her heart, but the one she had always disliked and had even personally harmed, eldest Miss Su. When Yuru was brought over by Su Wan's personal maid, Su Wan was arranging flowers in a blue and white porcelain vase with extreme boredom. "Young miss, I've brought him here." When you brought Yuru in front of Su Wan and immediately turned around and retreated behind Su Wan. Su Wan's hand that was holding the flowers slightly paused. She looked up and saw Yuru's palm-sized face. She had to say that this girl was pretty. Miss Su. Seeing Su Wan again, Yuru's mood was especially complicated. She didn't know how she should face her. At the same time, Yuru's heart was also faintly afraid that the people of Marquis Jingning Fu would know the truth of what happened that day. "In the future, you can just call me Miss like when you." Su Wan actually understood Yuru's mood. She absent-mindedly instructed and then carefully sized up Yuru a few times, looking her up and down, making her feel goosebumps. "Yuru is already dead. In the future, you have no relationship with Marquis Qingchuan Fu. From today onwards, you will be called Wen Yu. From now on, I will be your master. Do you remember all these?"
Yes.
Seeing that Su Wan did not make things difficult for her, Yuru took a deep breath and looked at Su Wan with a gaze full of gratitude. This servant, Wen Yu, will properly serve Mississippi from this moment onwards. She obtained a new life. When you knew that from this moment onwards, she was no longer Yuru and no longer had any relationship with Marquis Qingchuan Fu. As a servant, she must scrupulously abide by her duty. This way she can stay in Marquis Jingning Fu for a long time. 20 of the 10th month. The first heavy snow of the year fell in the imperial capital. Stepping on the thick snow, Su Wan brought people to the entrance of Jin Wang Fu for the first time. Right now, the stove in the hall was burning brightly. Su Rue was draped in a thick purple cloak and reclined on the soft couch at the side. Seeing Su Wan's figure, Su Rue's eyes flashed with a touch of joy, but he glanced at Wen Yu, who was closely following behind Su Wan, and Su Rue imperceptibly wrinkled his brows. "One of us." As if seeing through Su Rue's thoughts, Su-won couldn't help but whisper. Wen-yu was the daughter of Su-won's wet nurse and grew up together with Su-won. Although she was only a servant in the Fu, the two people's relationship was extremely good. Even Lucier treated Wen-yu much better than ordinary maids. So she was one of us, ah. Hearing Su-won's words, Su-rue finally set his heart at ease. Putting away his usual sickly appearance towards the ministers in the court, Su-rue sat up and looked at Su-won with a gentle face. Why haven't you come to see me for so many days? Because of his special identity, Su-rue could not frequently leave the Wangfu. On that day, he left Big White behind in the hunting grounds so that Su-won could come and find him at any time. But almost half a month had passed, and this was the first time Su-won came to visit. I'm very busy, Su-won said, and then very naturally sat beside Su-rue. There shouldn't be His Majesty's spies in this Wangfu, right? Su-rue smiled. I'm very safe here. The dead emperor still thinks that he has me firmly in his hands. Regarding everything in the Wangfu, he won't ask about it. Speaking of this, Su-rue felt somewhat sullen. Xiao-won, how about I just directly kill him and then let the fifth prince directly ascend the throne? What do you say? Su-won, that Wen-yu. Oh no, oh no. This servant seems to have heard something incredible. I won't be silenced and dismembered, right? I know you're formidable. Su-won somewhat helplessly looked at Su-rue. But this time, just bear with it. Don't you find it boring to solve the problem so violently? Regarding this world, Su-won didn't care too much about it at the beginning. But as soon as she entered the mission, such a big thing happened. This made Su-won's disgust towards Shin Qingjin soar. Su-won will not let Shin Qingjin finish playing so quickly. She wants to slowly make her fall from heaven to hell the moment she sees the hope of revenge. What she cares about, she will lose in this life. What she wants to retaliate, she will not be able to get her wish in this life. Su-won wants to make this woman regret her rebirth. Regret everything in this life. Was the previous life bitter? Was it painful? That was because you were stupid. Was this life still bitter? Or was it painful? Then you deserve it even more, because this was all your own doing. Glancing at the chill in Su-won's eyes, Su-rue knew that Su-won was serious about this mission. And once she became serious, Su-rue could only light candles for Shin Qingjin. Offending our family, Xiao-won, serves you right to be unlucky. Of course, whether Shin Qingjin died or not, Su-rue didn't care. He only cared about his own welfare. As the saying goes, after eating the marrow, one would yearn for the taste. Recently, our family's General Su has been thinking about reliving old dreams and whatnot. Right now, Su-won was by his side. Su-rue's thoughts started to come alive again. He first calmly raised his hand and put it around Su-won's shoulder. Seeing that Su-won didn't have any reaction, he was about to take a yard after taking an inch, but he saw that Su-won's eyes were already focused, smiling at him. Wangya, what are you doing? Woo. Su-rue somewhat resentfully smiled. Since I came today, I'll go back a bit later. What do you want to eat? I'll instruct the kitchen to make it for you. It's definitely more delicious than the ones in Marquis Jingning Fu. All right. Hearing Su-rue's words, Su-won nodded her head. This is my first time coming to Jin Wangfu. Accompany me for a walk. Wen-yu, you don't need to follow and serve. When Wen-yu heard Su-won's words, she just recovered from her sluggish state and blankly nodded her head. This servant understands. Although the accumulated snow in the Wangfu's courtyard had already been cleared, the rockery and trees in the rear courtyard were still covered in a layer of snow. Su-rue was afraid that Su-won would freeze and draped his cloak over her shoulders as soon as they went out. The two people slowly walked in the Wangfu. No one spoke, but their hearts were exceptionally peaceful. Su-rue, have you ever thought about the future? Right now, there were no outsiders by their side. Only then did Su-won dare to directly call Su-rue's name. She didn't mind when you knowing about young Miss Su and Jin Qinhuang's ambiguous relationship, but she couldn't let anyone know of their mission enforcer identity. In the future, Su-rue's gaze retracted from a distance and directly fell on Su-won's face. You are my future, I am your future. Chapter 115. You are my future, and I am your future. Anyone could say pleasant words of love, but Su-won knew that Su-rue always liked to simply say his own feelings. Just like how he was used to spoiling her, letting her do it, not minding embarrassing himself in front of her, not minding acting stupid in front of her. Everything was because he liked her. He liked to spoil her like this, accompany her. In the future, in the past, it was a very distant and unfamiliar word to Su Wan, but now she was already starting to think about the future. Every mission enforcer had their own original life. It was impossible for them to endlessly live in the mission, live in other people's world. In fact, ever since Su Wan truly accepted Su Rue, she was thinking about their future. Because there was love and hope, the unknown future also made people look forward to it. Su Rue stretched out his hands from the side and tightly hugged Su Wan in his embrace. Xiao Wan, these few days, I missed you so much. He lowered his head and softly whispered in her ear, his warm breath blowing into Su Wan's ear, tickling. Su Wan didn't speak, but subconsciously leaned into Su Rue's embrace. The fluttering snow dyed the two people's hair white. Su Wan couldn't help but start to think, if they could be like this for a lifetime, until their hair turned white, how good would that be? Just as Su Rue said, Jian Wangfu's chef's cooking skills were first-rate. By the time Su Wan and Su Rue returned from the courtyard, the dining room was already filled with dishes. Su Wan's cooking skills were very good. Regarding eating, she wasn't picky and naturally wouldn't make do. Because they walked through several worlds together, Su Rue also understood Su Wan's taste very well, so there wasn't a single dish on the table that Su Wan didn't like to eat. When Yu had been standing behind Su Wan the whole time, quietly watching Su Wan and Su Rue eat. When she was in Marquis Jingning Fu, Su Wan always ate together with Lu Shi. Every time at the dining table, she always didn't talk while eating and didn't talk while sleeping. She also ate very little, but today, she and Jin Wangye chatted and laughed. The two of them ate for more than an hour, but what was strange was that when Yu, who stood behind them, didn't feel the slightest bit bored or depressed. Perhaps it was because the process of those two eating looked too warm and harmonious. Or perhaps it was because when they looked at each other and smiled, that scene was too pleasing to the eye. When Yu didn't know how to express her feelings, she only felt they were too well matched. Her young miss and Jin Wangye, sitting there, looked like a proper husband and wife. What Marquis Qingchuan Gongzi, what General Shun, they all have to stand aside when Su Wan came out of Jin Wangfu. The sun had just set. The red sky reflected the snow on the street with a dazzling color. Su Rue wore a cloak and sent Su Wan to the entrance of the Wangfu until he saw her sitting in Su family's carriage. Watching the carriage go away under the setting sun, Su Rue reluctantly withdrew his gaze. Master, it's windy outside. Let's go back. The chamberlain looked at Su Rue with concern. His hands were already habitually raised, supporting Su Rue's arm. Well, in the past 10 years, he had already gotten used to taking care of his weak and sickly master. Although he didn't know why his master suddenly recovered, it was hard to change the habits of many years. Moreover, he was old and shrewd. This old chief steward knew that this was the main entrance of the Wangfu. He didn't know if there were spies outside, so he had to be thorough.
Cough, cough.
Su Rue raised his hand to support his chin and coughed twice. Then he slowly turned around and slowly walked back to the Wangfu. Entering the main entrance, Su Rue's expression immediately turned cold, and the old steward on the side tactfully retreated 3 steps, giving his position to the shadow guard who appeared and disappeared mysteriously. The imperial family of Daqing dynasty had a tradition of cultivating shadow guards. In order to ensure absolute loyalty, these shadow guards followed by their master's side since childhood. Because Qin Mu Yan's body was weak since childhood, and he was also the youngest son of the empress, other princes only had 2 shadow guards by their side, but he had no less than 4. The codenames of these 4 shadow guards were respectively Zhue Feng, Zhue Yu, Zhue Shui, Zhue Wu. Zhue Shui was the only female shadow guard. She was good at Qinggong and disguise. Zhue Feng was the one with the highest martial arts among the 4, and was also the one Su Rue sent to secretly protect Su Wan. As for Zhue Yu, because he was the youngest among the 4, he always followed by Su Rue's side and served as a guard, a cart driver, a manservant, and so on. He could be said to be an all-round talent. The heavenly voice that Su Wan heard outside the carriage that day was actually Zhue Yu's child's shoes. The last shadow guard, Zhue Wu, was good at assassination and using poison. Because the original owner was a peace-loving and ambitious youth, our family's Zhue Wu had always been idle in the Wangfu and was in a semi-unemployed state. Fortunately, Su Rue came now. Zhue Wu, who had always been depressed, was immediately nurtured and put in an important position. Right now, he had already been sent by Su Rue to the capital to assassinate someone, master. Zhue Yu followed Su Rue's footsteps, and the two people entered the study together. As soon as they entered the door, they saw Zhue Shue's slender figure. "You're back?" Su Rue raised his eyes and looked at Zhue Shue. Right now, the young girl in front of him looked exactly the same as Chen Qingjin. Feeling Su Rue's scrutinizing gaze, Zhue Shue's expression tensed up and her tone involuntarily contained some fear. "Master, Zhue Shue is incompetent. This time, I didn't meet His Highness the Second Prince as I wished. This subordinate." "Heh." Su Rue sneered and lifted his feet to walk in front of Zhue Shue. His cold gaze fixated on her. "Luckily you didn't see him. If you really saw him, it would also ruin Bun Wang's important matter." "Wang Ye?" Zhue Shue froze and subconsciously raised her eyes to meet Su Rue's emotionless gaze. That gaze seemed to be able to penetrate her heart. Zhue Shue only felt cold all over, and her face was deathly pale, but she couldn't say a word to refute. Seeing that Zhue Shue was intimidated by him but didn't know where she did wrong, Su Rue couldn't help but coldly snort. "Your appearance-changing technique is indeed flawless, but do you think that Qin Yu is an ordinary person? With just your murderous aura, Bin Wang can feel it from 10 meters away. Do you think Qin Yu is blind? A person's appearance can be changed, his movements and tone can be imitated, but what about his aura? Impersonators who don't know how to restrain their aura are the most failed impersonators." Hearing Su Rue's words, Zhue Shue's expression changed greatly. After that, she knelt on the ground without hesitation. This subordinate knows her mistake. "Wang Ye, please punish me." Punish? If it was in the past, Su Rue would have already chopped up the people who provoked him and fed them to the dogs. Now, Jin Wangfu didn't have anyone that could be used. He could only reluctantly continue to use these few shadow guards. "This is the first time. Bin Wang will give you a way out. Go back and practice diligently. If you can't control your aura as you wish, then don't go out again." Finished instructing, Su Rue somewhat irritably waved his hand. Zhue Shue immediately got up and took her leave as if she was pardoned. After Zhue Shue left, Su Rue began to sit at the desk and flip through the bamboo slips. It's just that he was unable to concentrate and kept thinking about Su Wan's matters. "Zhue Yu, why hasn't Zhue Feng returned yet?" If Su Wan returned to Marquis Jingning Fu, Zhue Feng should have returned to report. Since he still hasn't returned, it proves that Su Wan is still on the road, right? But Jin Wangfu and Marquis Jingning Fu are both in the center of the imperial capital. In reality, the distance is not too far. Could it be that something happened on the road? For example, she met Xin Yushu and whatnot. Thinking of this, Su Rue's gaze became a bit colder. "Zhue Yu, Bin Wang also doesn't have anything to do recently. If you're idle, then go to Marquis Qingchuan Fu and help Bin Wang look after Xin Yushu." Zhue Yu. Chapter 116. A heavy snowfall dyed the buildings of the imperial capital white. At this time, it was dusk and the cold wind whistled. There weren't many pedestrians on the long street. Su Wan sat in Marquis Jingning Fu's horse carriage with her eyes closed. The entire carriage suddenly shook and the small brazier in the carriage was almost overturned. "Young miss, be careful." Wen Yu immediately hugged Su Wan and used her body to protect her. "I'm fine." Su Wan smiled at Wen Yu and glanced at the back of Wen Yu's hand that was scalded by the sparks that flew out. Su Wan's gaze darkened and she immediately lifted the curtain and coldly looked outside. "What's wrong?" The driver outside the carriage also had a terrified expression. Young miss in front is the Supreme Court's patrol officers." "And?" Su Wan frowned and looked over. Sure enough, she saw that the street in front was in a mess and a police blockbuster was being staged. The neatly dressed Supreme Court's patrol officers were chasing and intercepting a black-clothed man. "Turn around and take a detour," Su Wan commanded and was about to put down the curtain when the black-clothed man, who was forced to a dead end, suddenly rushed towards the direction of the carriage. His speed was so fast that he arrived outside the carriage in a flash. Su Wan and the black-clothed man's eyes met and felt the sharpness in the other party's eyes. But Su Wan was not too nervous. An awe-inspiring silver light flashed and the black-clothed man was caught off guard and was immediately injured by the hidden weapon that came from the air. Taking advantage of the moment when he was distracted, Su Wan fiercely shouted, "Help!" Hearing Su Wan scream, the black-clothed man wanted to throw himself into the carriage, but he was injured and his movements were slightly slow. At this time, the people from the Supreme Court surrounded him and quickly subdued the black-clothed man. "Young miss, are you all right?" The patrol officer in the lead looked at Su Wan respectfully. Although he didn't recognize the young miss in front of him, looking at her clothes and the magnificence of the carriage, he knew that she must have come from a noble family in the imperial capital. "Scared me to death." Su Wan's complexion was pale and she patted her chest in shock. "Who is this person? Why is he so ferocious?" "This person is a great bandit." The patrol officer seemed to hesitate for a moment and then gave a perfunctory reply. Su Wan's gaze flashed and she did not ask much. She only nodded with some lingering fear. "So it's a great bandit. Take him away. Don't let him get away again." As she spoke, Su Wan immediately shrank back into her carriage with lingering fear. Seeing that Su Wan didn't pursue the matter, the patrolman immediately brought his subordinates and escorted the black-clothed man away. At this time, Su Wan, who returned to the carriage, hesitated for a moment and immediately ordered the driver to turn the carriage around and turn into an empty alley. "Wind, come out." The carriage stopped and Su Wan immediately called out to someone outside the carriage. A ghostly figure immediately floated over. "Miss Su, sorry to have startled you." Zhue Feng had been protecting Su Wan along the way. That hidden weapon just now was his handiwork. "I'm fine. Zhue Feng, don't follow me anymore. Quickly go and save that man. Don't let him enter the Supreme Court's prison." The secret prison of the Supreme Court was definitely a place where one could only enter but not leave. That person just now was definitely not some great thief. Su Wan felt that someone who could make the Supreme Court mobilize so many people to capture him on the street must have a very important identity. Hearing Su Wan's instructions, Zhue Feng hesitated. Although Master instructed him to listen to eldest young Miss Su's arrangements, all of this was carried out under the premise of protecting eldest young Miss Su's safety. If he left his post and something happened to eldest young Miss Su, "What? You're not willing to carry out my instructions?" As if seeing through Zhue Feng's thoughts, Su Wan coldly smiled. "I originally wanted to let you bring someone back to make a great contribution to your master. Since you're so unwilling then, from today onwards, don't follow me anymore. Tomorrow, I'll tell Mu Yin and let him change someone to protect me." "This subordinate doesn't dare." "Miss Su, this subordinate will do as you say." Hearing Su Wan's words, Zhue Feng immediately broke out in a cold sweat. "Eldest young miss, you're my great aunt, all right? If you really complain about me in front of Wang Ye." Zhue Feng felt that he definitely wouldn't be able to see tomorrow's sunset. Seeing Zhue Feng leave, Su Wan nodded her head in satisfaction and ordered the driver to return to the main road and continue in the direction of Marquis Jingning Fu. When the carriage returned to the Fu, someone informed Lu Shi early in the morning. Lu Shi hurriedly rushed to Su Wan's boudoir with a servant girl. At this time, Su Wan was ordering Wen Yu to take the ointment and apply it on the back of Wen Yu's hand. Seeing Lu Shi's figure, Su Wan faintly smiled. "Mother, why didn't you go out to play Ma Diao today?" "Play what Ma Diao?" "Say, you this girl. Mother did instruct you to build a good relationship with Jin Wang Ye, but you can't go to Jin Wang Fu and stay there for a day. If this were to be known by others, what would happen if any rumors were to spread? You should also know that although that Jin Wang Ye is also a talented person, he's already so old and still hasn't married a wife. Isn't it because his body is weak?" Speaking till here, Lu Shi couldn't help but sigh for our family's Jin Wang Ye. AI. It's also a pity for this Jin Wang Ye. Such a high status and such a handsome young fellow. Why is he impotent? Su Wan. What impotent? Su Wan then remembered that in this mission world setting, Qin Mu Yan's body was delicate and weak, and he didn't even have a wife. It was said that the imperial doctor even forbade him to have sex. So, the entire capital knows that Jin Wang Ye, he can't Do it? Suwon looked at Lusher's expression. She felt that if she said a sentence right now, mother's daughter took a fancy to Jin Wangya and wanted to marry him, she reckoned that Lusher would immediately faint. At this time, when you heard Lusher's words, her gaze also strangely looked at the mother and daughter pair. So, Foreign still didn't know that eldest young Miss and Jin Wangya. Actually, when you started to feel conflicted again, should I tell Foreign or not? What if Foreign found out about eldest young Miss and Jin Wangya and wanted to break up the affectionate couple? Moreover, His Highness Jin Wangya didn't seem to be as weak as the outside said. Lusher, who was at the side, didn't notice when Yu's conflicted expression and Suwon's gaze. She raised her hand and grabbed Suwon's small hand and continued to say, "Today, Yu Shu brought people over. Originally, he came to see you, but after waiting for a long time, you still didn't come back. It wasn't good for Mother to directly call people over to Jin Wang Fu to find you, so I could only help you arrange for him to come over tomorrow as a guest." Shin Yu Shu, what did he come for? Hearing Lusher mention Shin Yu Shu's name, Suwon instinctively frowned and her gaze subconsciously turned to Wen Yu's body. Sure enough, upon hearing Shin Yu Shu's name, Wen Yu's body stiffened and even her gaze started to drift. And, feeling the indifference in Suwon's tone, Lusher couldn't help but seriously size up her daughter. "Wanner, what happened to you recently? Didn't you always treat Yu Shu?" "Mother." Suwon looked at Lusher, her gaze somewhat absent-minded. "Mother, daughter wants to break off the engagement." "What did you say?" Chapter 117. Suwon and Shin Yu Shu's engagement was discussed by Marquis Qingchuan, Qinche and Marquis Jingning, Su Yun. Of course, everything was done on Su Yun's initiative, who let him only have Suwon, this one precious daughter, and his daughter just so happened to have a soft spot for Shin Yu Shu. Fortunately, Marquis Qingchuan, Qinche was also very satisfied with Suwon's identity. Marquis Jingning Fu only had Suwon, this one-D daughter. This Fu was a big family with a big business. According to Daqing's laws, after Suwon marries into Marquis Qingchuan Fu, she would still enjoy the inheritance rights of Marquis Jingning Fu. In other words, if she and Shin Yu Shu had two sons, then these two children could respectively inherit the titles of Marquis Qingchuan and Marquis Jingning. Lusher had always been a man of his word in Marquis Jingning Fu. She had always spoiled her precious daughter. It could be said that the reason why the original owner could live so smoothly and heartlessly was all thanks to her parents who doted on her. It's just that both success and failure were caused by the same person. This pair of parents raised the original owner to be too delicate, willful, and ignorant of worldly affairs. This caused her to look astute and valiant on the outside, but in reality, she had no cleavage, no scheming, and was especially easy to be used by people with ulterior motives. At this time, when she suddenly heard Suwon say that she wanted to break off the engagement, Lusher first berated her. Seeing Suwon's calm expression as if she had already steeled her heart, Lusher couldn't help but frown. She moved closer to Suwon and asked in a low voice, "Wanner, tell Mother the truth. Is it that matter was known by Shin Yu Shu?" In Lusher's eyes, her daughter was naturally the best, but she also knew that Shin Yu Shu didn't seem to like her daughter that much. But today, Shin Yu Shu was amiably waiting for Suwon in the Fu for most of the day. Lusher thought about it now and felt that there was something fishy about it. That Shin Yu Shu wouldn't come without a reason. He wouldn't have come to find Suwon to break off the engagement, right? In this imperial capital, who doesn't know each other? Once Shin family came to break off the engagement, where would Su family's face be? If that matter was spread out, then her daughter's entire life would be ruined. Just as Lusher's heart was tangled, Suwon lightly shook her head. "Mother, he doesn't know about that matter. The reason why I want to break off the engagement is because I fancy someone else." He had taken a fancy to someone else. Suwon's voice was not deliberately lowered. Wen Yu and Wen Yu, who heard Suwon's words coincidentally, turned their heads to look at her back. Wen Yu's face was full of surprise, while Wen Yu was cautiously waiting for Foreign's reply. "Oh, so he doesn't know. You're the one who took a fancy to what?" Mrs. Liu, who was slow to react, suddenly stood up from the chair and stared at her baby daughter in disbelief. "You said you liked someone else?" "Yes." Su Wan nodded her head solemnly. Hearing Su Wan's answer, Lucier suddenly slapped her face. It wasn't an illusion, right? Could it be that Wan really didn't like Shin Yushu anymore and shifted her affections to another man? Who is it? Lucier's eyes flashed and she stared at Su Wan with a serious expression. Is he as handsome as Qin Yushu? Was their status higher than the Shin family? Of course, the most important thing is he good to you? He treats me very well. Moreover, he is much more handsome than Shin Yushu, much more powerful than him, and his status is also higher than Shin Yushu. Compared to him, the entire Shin family is also too inferior to catch up. Su Wan answered Lucier's question with an indifferent face. Her voice had yet to fall when she saw Lucier raise her hand and slap her face again. Not a dream, Ma? Su Wan. Just how little confidence do you have in your daughter, Ah? Who? On this side, Lucier, who had confirmed that she wasn't daydreaming, immediately beamed with joy and moved closer to Su Wan. She gently pulled her hand and said, My good daughter, Yang Qin knows that Shin Yushu doesn't know what's good for him. He isn't your husband. Come, come, come. You tell Yang Qin the one you like. Who is it? Is it a member of the imperial family? It must be said that in this imperial capital, Shin Yushu was already considered a proud son of a generation. Those who were more outstanding and had a higher status than him were reckoned to be those members of the imperial family. Seeing Lucier's face full of hope and eyes full of, my daughter is awesome expression, Su Wan couldn't help but take a deep breath. He is from the imperial family and his status is very high. Speaking till here, Su Wan held Lucier's hand. Mother, do you want me to marry a man with a high status? Or do you want me to marry a man who sincerely treats me well? Of course he has to treat you well. Lucier's answer was resolute and decisive. Then she immediately added a sentence with a smile. Of course, the higher the status, the greater the ability. This way, he can better protect you. Mother is also not a person who fawns on the rich and powerful. Our Marquis Jingning Fu does not seek to climb up the social ladder, but Yang Qin must let you marry grandly and cannot be outdone by others. And if it's like this, Su Wan also smiled at Lucier. Mother, what do you think of Jin Qinwang? Jin Qinwang? That's extremely good. Lucier and the common people of the imperial capital were the same. If you mention Jin Qinwang in the imperial capital, who wouldn't clap their hands and praise him? Daqing's newest laws, the common people's peaceful and happy life. Which one of them didn't have Jin Qinwang's credit? As an imperial uncle, he didn't have the power to overturn the court, but he was famous throughout the world. This Jin Qinwang, ah. Wait a minute. Lucier was just about to praise a certain imperial uncle's great achievements like in the past, but she suddenly stopped talking and stiffly lowered her head to look at Su Wan, who was sitting in front of her with an indifferent face. Wanner, you. Just now? Who did you say just now? Mother. Mother seems to have misheard. You didn't mishear. Su Wan knew that Lucier would have this reaction, but she did not plan to continue to conceal her relationship with Su Rue. I like Jin Qinwang. I want to marry him as a fae. Su Wan said it straightforwardly, and there was not a trace of evasion in her eyes. Hearing Su Wan's words, Lucier's eyes rolled and did not disappoint everyone and fainted. Foreign. Fortunately, the personal maid at the side was quick and held the fainted Lucier in her arms. Young miss, you see this? Send my mother back. She's too happy, so excited that she fainted. Su Wan lowered her eyes and indifferently instructed the maid at the side. A certain maid. Young miss, can you grow some heart? Foreign clearly fainted from fright, okay? Why haven't you left yet? When Su Wan raised her eyes again, she saw that Lucier's maid was still supporting Lucier and standing in the same place with a lifeless face. Oh, got it. A certain maid had no choice but to miserably support Lucier out of Su Wan's courtyard. Waiting until their figures left, Su Wan sighed and slowly stood up. Wen Yu, your hand was scalded today. Go back and rest first. Let Wen Yu stay behind to serve you. Wen Yu had always been strict with Su Wan's orders. When Wen Yu left, only Su Wan and Wen Yu were left in the boudoir. Wen Yu's expression was a bit complicated. She kept using her hands to unconsciously grasp the corner of her clothes. She had the heart to ask Su Wan something, but it seemed that she didn't have the courage. Seeing Wen Yu's expression, Su Wan didn't make a sound. She just silently walked to the window and suddenly opened the window. Cold wind instantly rushed in. Young miss, when you caught a glimpse of Su-won's actions and jumped in fright. She immediately rushed over and quickly closed the window. Young miss, when you turned her head and looked at Su-won somewhat inexplicably. What entered her eyes was Su-won's pale complexion. Su-won softly called out and looked at Wen-yu in front of her with a complicated gaze. Actually, you also like Shu-ji, isn't that right? Young miss. Hearing Su-won's words, Wen-yu's expression changed greatly. She somewhat nervously retreated a few steps and knelt in front of Su-won with a plop. Young miss, Wen-yu's life was given by you. Wen-yu is young miss's servant in this life. As for Chen Gongzi, and everything in Chen family, this servant has long had no relationship with this servant. Wen-yu missed it once. She didn't want to make another mistake. She had done something shameful and received punishment. Let her understand that a person should never do anything wrong in this life. Some people accumulated virtue and did good deeds all their life, but did not become rich and noble because of it. This kind of life seemed to have suffered a big loss, but in fact, there were no disasters and no difficulties with a clear conscience. A lifetime of peace and quiet. Wasn't that heaven's greatest gift? Only people who hated their mistakes and couldn't turn back would know what was called one wrong step after another, wasting a lifetime. You don't need to be so afraid. Seeing Wen-yu kneeling on the ground with a pale complexion, Su-won bent down and stretched out her hands to help Wen-yu up. Could it be that you're still afraid of me now? I know that the people outside all say that I'm unruly, headstrong, and brainless. They feel that I'm not worthy of you, Shu-ji. That's why there were people scheming against me in Marquis Qingchuan-fu. Young miss? Hearing Su-won's words, Wen-yu's entire body stiffened. Young miss, you. Don't tell me. Glancing at Wen-yu's doubtful expression of disbelief, Su-won somewhat laughed at herself. Wen-yu, aren't you curious why I saved you? Actually, the reason is very simple. Because you're the victim of that matter. I am also one. Speaking like this, Su-won's hands suddenly uncontrollably gripped Wen-yu's arm. Her hands were exerting strength, but her whole body was trembling non-stop. Wen-yu didn't seem to feel the pain in her arm. She only widened her eyes and absent-mindedly looked at Su-won, who was trembling non-stop in front of her. That day, could it be that she was also thinking of this possibility? Wen-yu's heart couldn't help but start to feel uncomfortable and guilty. It was her fault. It was what she did. It was she who harmed young miss, harmed herself. Because of this matter, she received the biggest punishment in her life. And the person who saved her from the endless abyss was none other than the person in front of her who was hurt the most by her. Young miss, I. Wen-yu moved her lips, wanting to say everything. But when the words reached her mouth, she suddenly didn't have the courage. Her sins were grave, her death wasn't worth pitying. But like this, she still hoped to live, to continue living. Marquis Jingning-fu was her second home. Young miss and Wen-yu both treated her very well. Wen-yu was reluctant to part with this place, even she felt that God arranged for her to come here, to atone for her sins. She must first atone for her sins. There's a chance. There's a way. She will definitely have a chance to help young miss. Young miss, actually you. Chapter 118. The stove in the room was still burning brightly. Outside the window, the sky had completely darkened. Su-won stood by the window in a daze. Hearing Wen-yu's question, she seemed to have sunk into her own memories. Her hands that had been grabbing onto Wen-yu unconsciously let go. After a long while, Su-won slowly said, "So what if I like it? So what if I don't like it? Shu-ji didn't like me in the past, and he won't like me in the future. Moreover, I can feel that Qingjin Mimi also doesn't like me. They are blood-related siblings and presumably, in his eyes, Mimi is far more important than me." When you heard Su-won mention Chen Qingjin, she was also absent-minded for a moment. She, who grew up in the Chen family, had very deep feelings for the Chen siblings. In the past, when you felt that she would follow Chen Qingjin for a lifetime, but now, when you didn't know how to describe her current mood, she couldn't even remember Chen Qingjin's smile. That's right, that eldest young miss used to especially like to smile. Her smile was especially pure and innocent, But ever since she recovered from that serious illness, when you had never seen her smile like that again, she had changed. Not only did she make when you feel like she was a stranger, she even made when you feel scared and fearful at times. Was the current Chen Qingjin still the Chen Qingjin of the past? When you didn't dare to think too much? She only knew that she was now a person of Marquis Jingning Fu and was Su Wan's maid. She now had to consider everything for her master. Miss Shun will get married sooner or later. If you still like young Master Shun, you shouldn't give up your marriage. When you softly persuaded Su Wan, but Su Wan only somewhat reluctantly smiled at Yu. If I was still a virgin, I naturally wouldn't give up. But right now, I really am not worthy of you Shuji, and will even smear Marquis Jingning Fu's name. Rather than this, it would be better to let me marry Jin Wangya. Wangya is a good person. I won't be mistreated by him if I marry him. But Jin Xinwang he. When you opened her mouth and the expression on her face became even more complicated, His Highness's body is so weak. Are you willing to be a widow for the rest of your life? A living widow, Su Wan felt that if Su Rue was here, he would definitely slap Yu to death. Actually, there's nothing wrong with this. Su Wan deliberately sighed and looked at Yu with a sorrowful gaze. Yu, actually, I've long felt that you like Yu Shuji. Of course, you don't need to mind this matter. Yu Shuji is so powerful, it's normal for many people to like him. I've even been thinking. Speaking of this, Su Wan's gaze suddenly flashed coldly. After that incident, I've been thinking, just who would hate me so much and be so vicious? Not only did he want to ruin my reputation, he also wanted to push me into Qin Mian, that fire pit. Moreover, after I left, not only did he not let me off, he also took the opportunity to drag you into the water. I feel that. That person should also like Brother Yu Shu, moreover. Perhaps she knew that you also like him, so she thought of this scheme to kill two birds with one stone. Speaking till here, Su Wan paused and deliberately observed Yu's complexion. Sure enough, when Yu heard Su Wan's suspicion, her complexion immediately changed wildly. Miss, this is impossible. Why is it impossible? Su Wan raised her eyes, her gaze staring straight at Yu's eyes. To be able to do this in Marquis Qingchuan Fu, it's most likely someone from the Fu. I'm guessing that it must be a woman. She's jealous that I'm Yu Shuji's fiancé, and also knows that you've always secretly admired Yu Shuji, so she used this kind of scheme. Speaking till here, as if she thought of something, Su Wan's gaze suddenly flickered as she looked at Yu. That's right. It must be like this. I reckon that person should be someone you're familiar with, someone you're very familiar with. Yu, do you have any suspicions about who? Could it be another servant girl in Chen Qingjin's courtyard? Acquaintance, someone who likes Chen Yushi. When you only felt that her mind was in a mess. The mastermind behind that matter was clearly Chen Qingjin. She was indeed someone she was very familiar with, but how could she like Chen Yushu? They were blood-related siblings, eh? It can't be like this. When you denied it in her heart, but in the deepest part of her heart, because of Su Wan's words, a seed of doubt was left. Late at night, in the study of Jin Wangfu, Su Rue was still draped in a purple cloak, lazily leaning on the wooden chair in the study. Right now, there were two people standing in front of him. One of them was Zhue Feng, and the other was the black-clothed person Su Wan met on the street today. Right now, that black-clothed person had already changed into a clean gown. He did not wear a face scarf, and under the dim candlelight, a face that was 30% similar to Su Rue's carried a complicated coldness. Qin Hao. Su Rue closed his eyes and found the existence of such a person in the memories of the original owner. Although the current emperor, Qin Mu Feng, was the noble crown prince at that time, but in reality, he was not the successor that Xiandi favored. Xiandi had 9 sons. Qin Mu Feng was the eldest of the crown princes, and Qin Mu Yin was the 9th. When Xiandi was seriously ill, Qin Mu Yin was still a teenager, but he, who had always been intelligent and far-sighted, had already seen the situation clearly. On one hand, he listened to his imperial brother and imperial mother's arrangements and helped them plan. On the other hand, because Qin Mu Yin was kind-hearted and did not wish for his brothers to kill each other, he left behind a trick. Not long after Qin Mu Feng smoothly ascended the throne, those brothers of theirs either died or went missing. Now, Other than Qin Mu Yin, there was only Hunan Wang, Qin Mu Lin, who was still alive. Because he had always been in the Crown Prince's faction, after Qin Mu Feng ascended the throne, he took the initiative to request to retire and live in seclusion, saving his life. The other Wang Ye were naturally not so lucky, especially Qin Mu Yu. He was Xiandi's fifth son, and was once Xiandi's favorite successor. After Qin Mu Feng ascended the throne, Qin Mu Yu died of illness not long after. Even his Wang Fu was burned down by a big fire 2 months later. There was not a single person left alive in the entire Wang Fu. Cutting weeds and eliminating the roots, this was Qin Mu Feng's style. But what he did not know was that right under his eyes, there was a person who dared to cross the sea by deceiving everyone and saved Qin Mu Yu's son, Qin Hao, ninth uncle. Qin Hao looked at the ninth imperial uncle who was only 4 years older than him. His tone was somewhat complicated and hard to distinguish. "You saved me this time, but you will bring disaster upon yourself." Hearing Qin Hao's words, Su Rue did not say a word and only silently looked at Qin Hao. Su Rue had always been very accurate in judging people. He believed in his intuition. When he first saw Qin Hao, other than feeling that this brat was a bit similar to himself, he also felt Qin Hao's heart. This was a person who clearly distinguished gratitude and grudges and was very principled, decisive in killing. In the plot of the mission that Su Rue knew, Qin Hao did not exist. Then, there were 2 possibilities. First, the Qin Hao in the original world listened to Qin Mu Yan's arrangements and never took half a step into the capital, living his life incognito. And the second possibility was that Qin Hao was like today, sneaking into the capital or even entering the imperial city to assassinate. After failing, he was caught and brought to the Supreme Court. In the end, he died. Su Rue was more inclined towards the second possibility. He felt that Qin Hao was absolutely not a person who was willing to live his life incognito. And in the original world, he and Su Wan didn't exist. After the assassination failed, Qin Hao would naturally be tortured and beaten. He probably didn't give up Qin Mu Yan's name and could only quietly die in the Supreme Court's death prison. The candlelight in the study swayed. The atmosphere was oppressive. Qin Hao was stared at by Su Rue and unknowingly broke out in a cold sweat. However, he hadn't seen him for a few years. Qin Hao felt that the ninth imperial uncle in front of him had changed a lot. In Qin Hao's memory, the ninth imperial uncle was a sickly but especially gentle and amiable man. But the person in front of him gave Qin Hao a kind of especially dangerous feeling. Clearly, the other party was only calmly looking at him, but Qin Hao felt as if he was being stared at by a ferocious beast and didn't dare to act blindly without thinking. The tranquility in the study was maintained for a moment until Su Rue changed his sitting posture. He tightened the cloak on his body while lazily raising his eyes and smiling at Qin Hao. He said, "Qin Hao, do you want to be the emperor?" "Ninth uncle?" Qin Hao stared blankly. His body stiffened, and he looked somewhat astonished at Su Rue in front of him. "Right now, I'll give you 2 paths." Chapter 119. Or, I'll send you to the throne. Or, I'll send you to the yellow springs of Hades. Su Rue leaned over and looked at Qin Hao as he said this. The 2 people were separated by a mahogany desk. When Su Rue's voice fell, Qin Hao felt an irresistible, monstrous, murderous aura assaulting him. He didn't doubt Su Rue's words in the slightest. The man in front of him definitely didn't care for the yellow springs. And the yellow springs of Hades was even less of a problem. "I choose the first option." Under Su Rue's attentive gaze, Qin Hao swallowed a mouthful of saliva and quickly replied, "Very good." Su Rue smiled and straightened his body. Then he slightly raised his chin and narrowed his eyes. "Now, let's settle another matter." Another matter? Qin Hao still hadn't understood what Su Rue was talking about. He only felt his vision go black. In the next breath, his abdomen had already been heavily kicked by Su Rue. Qin Hao's entire body flew out. The huge impact smashed the study's door and Qin Hao's body fell in the middle of the Wang Fu's courtyard. It was only a kick, but Qin Hao not only flew out far, his entire body was curled up on the ground. He spat out blood while painfully clutching his abdomen with both hands. This scene was really. Jue Feng subconsciously rubbed his abdomen. Fortunately, He was smart and knew that he couldn't make young Miss Su unhappy. Otherwise, TSK, the outcome of the future emperor in front of him would be a true portrayal of his future. Ninth uncle. Qin Hao endured the intense pain in his abdomen. His gaze absent-mindedly looked at the man who was indifferently walking towards him step by step. At this moment, he truly felt the terror of this ninth imperial uncle. Terminally ill? Plagued by illness? Your mother. Have you ever seen a patient who could casually send a martial arts expert flying with a kick and make him spit out blood incessantly? Ninth uncle. Seeing that Su Rue had already arrived in front of him, Qin Hao's complexion became even more miserable. Even his voice was trembling. When he was besieged by people in the imperial city, when he was chased by the Supreme Court's patrolmen on the long street, Qin Hao didn't feel afraid. But he didn't know why. Seeing Su Rue approach step by step, that kind of baleful aura that emanated from his bones made Qin Hao's teeth chatter. Su Rue raised his hand and elegantly lifted his cloak, slowly squatting in front of Qin Hao's body. Does it hurt? It was clearly such a gentle and indifferent tone, but it made people's hair stand on end. Ninth uncle. Qin Hao didn't know how to answer. He could only call Uncle Ju over and over again. It seemed that he wouldn't be so afraid this way. This man is Uncle Ju. Will he really kill me? Qin Hao suddenly felt a bit uncertain. Meeting Qin Hao's somewhat frightened eyes, Su Rue didn't know why, but he thought of Xianyuanyi, as well as many ancient mission worlds that he had once experienced. Those emperors all looked at him with this kind of fear and uneasiness before they died. How boring. Su Rue retracted his gaze and slowly stood up. Jue Feng, help him to the courtyard to recuperate and tell him who he can't provoke. Yes. Jue Feng immediately rushed in front of Qin Hao. When he helped Qin Hao to the courtyard, the Wang Fu's doctor also rushed over. Watching the doctor examine Qin Hao's injuries with his own eyes, Jue Feng's heart couldn't help but tremble again. Breaking 3 ribs with 1 kick and whatnot. Wang Ye really only used 30% of his strength at that time. If he used his full strength, wouldn't it be 1 kick that killed him? Right now, Qin Hao's face was covered in cold sweat on the sickbed, but he didn't faint from the pain. It had to be said that this imperial family's orphan who had experienced great storms and waves since he was young and shouldered a blood feud was truly a man. Seeing that Qin Hao still had a tangled face, as if he didn't know what mistake he had committed, Jue Feng couldn't help but open his mouth and say softly, when you were being chased by the Supreme Court's patrolman, you met a young lady, do you remember? A young lady? Qin Hao's gaze was absent-minded, but he still nodded. Of course he remembered. At that time, he saw that the carriage belonged to a noble in the imperial capital. He wanted to seize the opportunity to take a hostage and escape from the imperial capital, who knew that at that moment he would be plotted against because of his negligence. Wait, plotted against? Qin Hao's gaze suddenly brightened, and he abruptly looked towards Jue Feng, who was at the bedside. That's right. Jue Feng knew that Qin Hao had already thought of something. He didn't deny it and simply nodded with a serious face. The person who used a hidden weapon to injure you was me, and that young lady, before long, will be the mistress of our Jin Wang Fu, and also your 9th imperial aunt. That's why you almost injured our family's Wang Ye's sweetheart. Kicking you with 1 kick is definitely light. Qin Hao, that I only intended to take her hostage. In all honesty, in the end, I didn't even touch a corner of her clothes, okay? After this incident, Qin Hao deeply understood a principle of life. Don't try to reason with 9th imperial uncle, because he is reason. A tyrannical Wang Ye doesn't explain this night. Qin Hao experienced the truth of life in the pain of hovering between life and death. And in Marquis Jingning Fu, it was already the morning of the 2nd day when Lu Shi woke up from her coma. Raising her eyes, she saw that her husband was wearing his court clothes and preparing to go to court. Lu Shi immediately climbed out of bed and firmly grabbed onto Su Yun's sleeves. Foreign, you're awake? Su Yun glanced at Lu Shi, his gaze filled with concern. Is your body all right? How come you fainted again? The servant girls in the Fu didn't tell Su Yun the reason why Lu Shi fainted. After all, this was the master's private matter. Servants with good eyesight were clear on what should be said and what shouldn't be said. Lu Shi opened her mouth and didn't know where to start. Her gaze fell on Su Yun's red court clothes, and Lu Shi couldn't help but ask, "Master, will you meet Jin Wangya when you go to court today?" Ninth Wangya? Su Yun stared blankly for a moment. He had been an official in the court for many years and couldn't be said to be very familiar with Qin Mu Yin, but he wasn't a stranger either. Wangya rarely goes to court recently. You also know that the weather is cold, Wangya's body is weak, there's nothing wrong with staying at home. Hearing Su Yun's words, Lu Shi's expression became even worse. "Master, do you know that Wan or Shi? She wants to break off the engagement with Chen family." What? When Su Yun heard Lu Shi's words, he froze in place. He spent a lot of effort to facilitate this marriage. How could this child break off the engagement just like that? Nonsense. Su Yun's expression sank. "Wait for me to come back from court. I'll properly talk to her. This child is really becoming more and more mischievous. How can a marriage that was set be broken off just like that? Wanner's age isn't young anymore. Once the marriage is broken off, where would she find a suitable candidate in such a short period of time? What's more, those hedonistic sons in the capital, which one can compare to Chen Yushu?" Hearing Su Yun's words, Lu Shi sighed again. "Not only that, Wan or she also said. She took a fancy to Jin Wangya. She wants to marry Jin Wangya as a Wang Fei." Wang Fei? This child? What did you say? For the first time, Su Yun's usually calm and elegant face revealed an extremely surprised expression. "Are you sure you didn't hear wrongly?" Wanner said. "Ninth Wangya? In our entire Daqing, there is only this one Qin Wang. I actually hope that I heard wrongly." Mentioning this, Lu Shi felt that she was a bit dizzy. This was really a sin. A good daughter first had such a big incident happen in Marquis Qingchuan Fu, and now she doesn't want the marriage that was already discussed. Fortunately, she insisted on marrying Jin Wangya to become a widow. Lu Shi felt that it was really necessary for her to go to Huangjue Temple to burn incense and conveniently find a great master to interpret her fortune. At the side, Su Yun's expression was also rich and colorful. As a civil official, Su Yun actually admired and appreciated Jin Wangya very much. However, the matter of Jin Wangya's poor health was known by all the commoners in Daqing. In the past, there were people who took the initiative to betroth their daughter to him, but he tactfully refused because of his health. Now Su Yun couldn't help but look at Lu Shi with a serious expression. "This matter was said by my daughter herself? Or did the Wang Fu's side leak some information?" This. Lu Shi heard her husband's words and suddenly froze. She really forgot about this matter. Her precious daughter first took a fancy to Qin Yushu and wanted to marry no one but the Lord. Now that she managed to climb up a marriage with Chan Jia, she steeled her heart to break off the marriage and in the blink of an eye, took a fancy to Jin Wangya. Chapter 120. Su Wan slept soundly that night. When she got up to eat in the morning, she thought that she would be caught by Lu Shi and taught a lesson again. In the end, Su Wan did not see Lu Shi's figure. After asking the housekeeper of the Fu, she found out that Lu Shi brought her personal servant girl to Huangjue Temple early in the morning. Burn incense and pray to Buddha? Well, other than playing Ma Diao, Lu Shi indeed had this hobby. She liked to pray to Buddha and ask for a fortune stick. Su Wan reckoned that Lu Shi must have gone to ask for a fortune stick for her matters, but this time, Lu Shi was destined to be disappointed. It was close to noon and Lu Shi still had not returned, but Marquis Jingning Fu welcomed a guest. Shin Yushu. Su Wan had long forgotten what Lu Shi said yesterday. When the steward came to report that Shin Gongzi had come to visit, Su Wan then remembered that Lu Shi said that Shin Yushu had already paid a visit. Letting Wen Yu guard the courtyard, Su Wan brought Wen Yu to Marquis Fu's reception hall. Shin Yushu was sitting upright, holding a teacup in his hand. The expression on his face was very calm and indifferent. "Shin Gongzi, you came?" Su Wan greeted Shin Yushu as soon as she entered the door. Her tone was neither salty nor light, without the intimacy of the past. When Shin Yushu heard Su Wan's voice, he was startled. In the past, when they met, Su Wan would always call him Yushu-ji, Yushu-ji. Because of their engagement, Shin Yushu did not specifically ask her to change the way she addressed him. But today, Su Wan's attitude was clearly somewhat distant. This sudden unfamiliarity made Shin Yushu feel somewhat unaccustomed. "Su, young Miss Su." Hesitating, Shin Yu-shu still used the honorific as usual. In fact, at this time, Shin Yu-shu remembered that the two of them had known each other for so many years, but it seemed that he had never taken the initiative to get close to her. He had never even called her by her maiden name. The two of them were engaged in name, but at this time, the two of them sitting in the hall were exceptionally cold. Suwon no longer spoke, and Shin Yu-shu also didn't know what to say. When he was at home, he clearly wanted to come to Marquis Jingning Fu to see her and conveniently ask about her current situation. But now that he met that pair of unfamiliar and somewhat indifferent eyes, Shin Yu-shu suddenly didn't know how to open his mouth. Neither of them spoke. Suwon indifferently sat on the wooden chair, while Shin Yu-shu continued to sip the tea. Only when the cup of tea was finished did Suwon raise her eyes and look at Shin Yu-shu, who was sitting on the side. "How is this tea?" Shin Yu-shu stared blankly for a moment. His mind was preoccupied, and he simply didn't care about how this cup of tea was. Seeing his somewhat speechless and awkward appearance, Suwon couldn't help but smile. "Young Master Shin, don't be nervous. I see that you've been drinking tea. If you like it, I'll call the servants to make a few more cups for you." "No, there's no need." Shin Yu-shu put down the teacup and looked at Suwon's smiling face with a gentle gaze. "Actually, I came here today to see you." In the past, Shin Yu-shu never carefully paid attention to Suwon, but ever since the last time he came into contact with her in the hunting ground, Shin Yu-shu could always inadvertently think of this girl who smiled very brightly and did things without a care in the world. The relationship between people was just this subtle. When you don't care about it, no matter how much the other party did, you wouldn't be able to see it. When you truly care about it, you will start to worry about gains and losses. Shin Yu-shu felt that Suwon was somewhat cold towards him now. Could it be that it was because he had been estranged from her in the past? "See me?" Hearing Shin Yu-shu's words, Suwon lowered her eyes, as if she was somewhat preoccupied. "Young Master Shun, actually, I also just happen to have something to tell you." "Oh? What is it?" Hearing Suwon's words, Shin Yu-shu turned his head and looked at Suwon with a serious expression. Suwon finally slowly raised her eyes and looked at Shin Yu-shu with a somewhat complicated gaze. I want to break off the engagement." Hesitantly saying these words, after finishing speaking, Suwon's entire body leaned against the chair, as if she had used up all the strength in her body. "Break off the engagement?" Shin Yu-shu suddenly stood up and looked at Suwon with some disbelief. "What did you say? You want to break off the engagement with me?" Shin Yu-shu's questioning tone was full of disbelief. Right now, his pair of bright eyes were staring at Suwon's eyes without blinking. "Why? Why do you want to break off the engagement?" At the very least, she should give him a clear answer. "No reason. I just don't like you anymore. I've always liked you so much, but you don't like me. I feel very tired." Suwon raised her eyes and looked at Shin Yu-shu face to face without flinching. "I also want to find a husband who loves me dearly and sincerely treats me well." She said these words with sincerity, and her eyes involuntarily reddened. Shin Yu-shu's heart trembled, and he looked at Suwon with some guilt. "Actually, I can also treat you very well." "It's too late." Suwon unhurriedly stood up and interrupted Shin Yu-shu's words. "Some things that have happened can no longer be undone. Shin Yu-shu, you and I are destined to have no fate in this life. I'm a bit tired and won't send you off." Not waiting for Shin Yu-shu to react, Suwon already unhesitatingly brought Wen-yu and slowly left. In the empty living room, Shin Yu-shu stood in the same place for a long time without moving, his slender figure looking slightly lonely at this moment. Marquis Qingchuan Fu. Chen Qingjin heard about the matter of Shin Yu-shu going to Sujia early in the morning. Because of this matter, she had been unable to sit or stand at ease. Just as Chen Qingjin racked her brains to think of how to expose Suwon's true colors in front of Shin Yu-shu had already brought the little servant boy back somewhat absent-mindedly. "Big brother?" Chen Qingjin saw Shin Yu-shu pass by her courtyard and immediately lifted her skirt and rushed in front of Shin Yu-shu. "Big brother, didn't you go to Sujia? Why did you come back so quickly?" Sujia. Hearing Chen Qingjin mention Sujia, Shin Yu-shu's complexion immediately became somewhat unsightly. Chen Qingjin's gaze flashed. As usual, She raised her hand to hold Shin Yushu's arm and continued to speak with an innocent face. It's already lunchtime. Marquis Jingning Fu is too lacking in manners. They actually didn't know to ask Big Brother to stay in their fu for a meal? Speaking till here, Chun Qing Jian purposely pouted. The expression on her face also became very indignant. Originally, I thought that young Miss Su was the only one in Marquis Jingning Fu who acted willfully and rashly. I didn't expect that their fu would actually treat a guest like this, clearly not putting Big Brother in their eyes. Enough. Shen Yu-shu suddenly loudly interrupted Chan Qingjin's words. In Chen Qingjin's memory, in both lives, her older brother had never used such a fierce tone to speak to her. This time, he actually shouted at her, and it was even for Su Jia's matter? For a moment, Chun Qingjin's heart felt even more uncomfortable. She pursed her lips and her eyes were already filled with mist. Big Brother, you actually shouted at me for someone else? Did I say anything wrong? Who in the entire imperial capital doesn't know that eldest young Miss Su is an idiot? Their family and our family's marriage is already climbing up the social ladder. I just don't like Su Jia, and even more don't like Su Wan. She simply isn't worthy of Big Brother. At this time, Chun Qingjin simply used this as a pretext to make a fuss, bitterly weeping and snotted Shen Yushu. She knew that her older brother had always been hard-mouthed but soft-hearted, doting on her the most. Perhaps because of this matter, he would reconsider her marriage with Su Jia. Only, hearing Chan Qingjin's words, Shen Yushu froze in place. Do I deserve him or not? Even if in the entire aristocratic circle of the imperial capital, everyone felt that Su Wan wasn't worthy of him. So what? Right now, it was Su Wan who wanted to break off the engagement, and he was suddenly somewhat at a loss. Without the vexation and anger of being broken off the engagement, as long as Shin Yushu remembered what Su Wan said, as well as her expression and gaze at that time, his heart would feel very guilty, no matter how willful she was in other people's eyes, no matter how disrespectful she was. At least, she once tried so hard to like him and did a lot of things for him that other people saw as one-sided wishful thinking. And he himself seemed to have never given her the slightest bit of response. Chapter 121. It didn't take long for the matter of Su family withdrawing from the engagement to Shun family to spread in the imperial capital. In the beginning, everyone felt that this matter must have been deliberately said by Su family in order to save their face. Su Wan taking the initiative to withdraw from the engagement to Shin Yushu? It would be more reasonable to say the opposite of this matter. However, not long after, this news was personally confirmed by Shin Yushu. He even personally admitted that he didn't want to withdraw from the engagement with Su family. Because of Shin Yushu's words, this matter immediately became a topic of conversation among the group of debauches in the imperial capital. Everyone was very curious as to why Su Wan wanted to withdraw from the engagement with Shin Yushu, and what possessed Shin Yushu to actually not want to withdraw from the engagement with Su Wan. There were strange things every year, but this year there were especially many. These few days, dark clouds covered Marquis Qingchuan Fu, and Marquis Jingning Fu was also not much better. That day, when Lu Shi returned from Huangjue Temple, Shin Yushu had already left. When Lu Shi arrived at Su Wan's boudoir, intending to persuade her not to act as she wished, she was informed by Su Wan that she had already laid her cards on the table with Shin Yushu. Immediately, Lu Shi went berserk. It's just that the berserk Lu Shi couldn't bear to lay a deadly hand on her own daughter, and also didn't have the face to go to Marquis Qingchuan Fu to take back Su Wan's words. In the end, Lu Shi could only vent all of her sullen anger on Su Yun. The pitiful Marquis Jingning had always been a slave to his wife. He always listened to his wife's words, hitting wherever she pointed. Seeing that Lu Shi was really angry, Su Yun was also worried for his daughter who didn't grow up. The husband and wife discussed it, and in the end, Su Yun still decided to put down his face and personally go to Jin Wangfu. In Su Yun's view, this matter was definitely Su Wan's own idea. No matter if she fancied Wang Ye's peerless elegance or unparalleled wisdom, Jin Wangye, that kind of noble and intelligent person, would absolutely not fancy her. That's right, Su Yun had no confidence in his own daughter. He was even prepared to be ridiculed by the people in the Wangfu. Fortunately, Su Yun was also familiar with Jin Wangye's character and knew that even if he didn't fancy Su Wan, he would absolutely not spread this matter out. So, Su Yun, who was fully prepared, took advantage of the night and brought his servant boy to visit Jin Wangfu. What Su Yun didn't expect was that in Jin Wangfu, he received an extremely warm and sincere welcome from the gatekeeper to the steward of the Wangfu. This made Su Yun somewhat surprised, but he didn't think much about it. Until he saw Jin Wang in the study, Su Yun hesitantly expressed some of his daughter's thoughts. In the end, he patted his chest and promised Wang Ye that he would strictly discipline his daughter in the future and would never let her have the chance to offend Wang Ye again. Su Rui lazily listened to Su Yun's words until he finished saying a bunch of things. Only then did Su Rui lightly lift his eyelids and indifferently look at Su Yun. "Marquis Jingning, are you done?" "Ah, yes." Su Yun nodded subconsciously. "All right." Su Rui stood up and glanced at Su Yun indifferently. Then he slowly opened his mouth and said, "Bin Wang can speak now, right? First, this prince likes Miss Su very much and is very willing to take her as a concubine. Second, other than this prince absolutely won't allow any other man to have any ideas on her, and also won't allow anyone to touch a single strand of her hair. Of course, Su Darren and Su Foreign are no exception, otherwise, you will have to bear the consequences." Su Yun. Did this marquis hear wrongly? Seeing Su Yun standing there foolishly, Su Rui didn't say anything more. Instead, he casually picked up a blue and white porcelain teacup on the desk and gently played with it in his hands for a while. Then, with a slight force, the high-quality blue and white porcelain turned into a pile of powder in the blink of an eye in Su Rui's hands. Su Yun. Not only did I hear wrongly, don't tell me that I'm also hallucinating? Marquis, Bun Wang's words, do you remember them? Seeing that Su Yun had returned to his senses, Su Rui lightly clapped his hands with a smile that wasn't a smile, and countless powder floated down from his palms. A ghostly figure suddenly appeared. Zhu Yu took the prepared towel and respectfully handed it to Su Rui. Su Rui took the towel and wiped his hands with an indifferent expression while narrowing his eyes, waiting for Su Yun's reply. Su Yun. Can I refuse? Replying to Wang Ye, this official will remember. Su Yun's mind spun a few times before he finally slightly lowered his head and respectfully replied. Seeing that Su Yun was so sensible, Su Rui also had a rare amiable expression. Since it's like this, Su Darren, you should go back and prepare. After the new year, Bin Wang will marry young Miss Su. In the future, we will be a family. Family and whatnot. Su Yun felt a bit sad. Was there anyone who threatened their own father-in-law like this? Even if you're a Wang Ye, fine, you're a Wang Ye. You win that. After Su Yun returned to the Fu, he immediately closed the door and studied with his foreign, Lu Shi, for a long time. Whether it was Jin Wang Ye's deep concealment or his favoritism towards his daughter, all made Su Yun feel a bit strange. But after the husband and wife studied and studied, they only obtained a helpless result. A higher official can crush people to death, not to mention that person was Jin Wang. Of course, the most important thing was that their worrisome daughter was still willing. So, this marriage, they could only acknowledge it. Just like this, when those silk pants in the capital were still debating whether it was Su Wan who ate the wrong medicine or Shin Yu Shu who ate the wrong medicine, Marquis Jingning Fu had already quietly arranged a marriage with Jin Wang Fu. Knowing that her family's young miss was going to marry Jin Wang, Wen Yu, who was in the courtyard, was the happiest because she had followed Su Wan to Jin Wang Fu and personally saw how Jin Wang treated her family's young miss very well. Wen Yu felt happy for her family's young miss from the bottom of her heart. In contrast, when Wen Yu learned of this news, her entire person became more and more sad and haggard. In her view, young miss was forced to do this, compromised. Her heart was like still water, cutting off her own path of retreat. In short, young miss walking to this step today was all her own fault. As a result, when the entire Marquis Jingning Fu was quietly preparing for the happy event after the new year, only Wen Yu was hesitating in her heart, not knowing what to do. In the blink of an eye, it was the end of the year. Every year on New Year's Eve, His Majesty would host a banquet to entertain the civil and military officials, and the Empress Dowager would also host a banquet in the inner palace for a group of noble womenfolk. At this time, Not only did Su Wan receive the Empress Dowager's invitation, Chen Qingjin and Chen Qingyao of Marquis Qingchuan Fu also received the Empress Dowager's invitation at the same time. Recently, although Marquis Qingchuan Fu was affected by Su Jia breaking off the engagement, Chen Qingjin's mood was better than anyone else's. Although she didn't know why Su Wan took the initiative to break off the engagement, as long as she thought that her eldest brother didn't need to marry that woman that she loathed, Chen Qingjin's mood would be refreshed. Now that she received the Empress Dowager's invitation, Chen Qingjin's gaze turned and a plan came to her mind. Since she had already settled the Su Wan that she loathed, then it should be the main character, Chen Qingyao's turn. In her past life, she schemed to snatch away her husband. In this life, Chen Qingjin still looked down on that trash man. Since she, Chen Qingyao, wanted it, then she would be a good person to the end. She might as well directly help her and Fifth Prince. The New Year's Eve banquet still hadn't opened, but there were already people who couldn't wait. Chapter 122. On New Year's Eve, tens of thousands of houses were lit up. When Lu Shi brought Su Wan into the back palace, there were already a lot of people in the palace garden. Among the large group of noble ladies dressed in gorgeous colors, Chen Qingjin, who was dressed in plain brocade, was particularly eye-catching. Wasn't the so-called washing away all the splendor just another kind of grandstanding? Tonight, Su Wan still followed Lu Shi's instructions and wore a bright red cotton skirt and palace dress. Her long hair was also tied into the most popular hair pendant in the imperial capital. She didn't ask for it to be too conspicuous, but she asked for it to not be rude in front of people. "Sister Wan, you came." The first to rush up and greet Su Wan was impressively Chen Qingyao. The little girl was also wearing a crimson heavy palace dress tonight, setting off her immature little face even more fair and sparkling. "Sister Qingyao." Su Wan nodded her head at Chen Qingyao. Because she had already broken off the engagement with Chen Jia, Su Wan was very polite towards Chen Qingyao's intimacy, and those noble daughters of official families all hid at the side and whispered. Su Wan knew that the original owner was famous for being spoiled and willful in the imperial capital. Those noble ladies who were talented and virtuous had always been cold and aloof and were unwilling to deal with Su Wan, this kind of ignorant straw bag. And those who had slightly lower statuses and wanted to get close to her were looked down upon by the original owner. Therefore, in reality, the only one who could talk to Su Wan in every big banquet was really only Chen Qingyao, this black-bellied little lowly. At this time, Lu Shi had already been pulled over by Madame Wang together with a group of Marquis Furins. Madame Yu was also chatting and laughing with a group of familiar Furins. Chen Qingyao pulled Su Wan and asked her many questions. The two people were talking and laughing and could be considered amiable. On the contrary, it was Chen Qingjin who had been sitting alone not too far away, coldly looking at Chen Qingyao and Su Wan chatting cheerfully and wittily. She slightly lowered her eyes, the corner of her mouth sweeping up a mocking smile. In this life, Su Wan shouldn't hope to marry into Chen Jia. Chen Qingyao still tried so hard to rope her in. She didn't know what she was planning. "Sister Wan, why did you break off the engagement with brother?" Chen Qingyao, who affectionately pulled Su Wan and asked all sorts of questions, suddenly changed the topic to Chen Yushu. A trace of loneliness flashed on her charming face. "Recently Gij is very unhappy. Qingyao is also unhappy. Wan Jiejie, you're so good. If you become my sister-in-law, you definitely won't bully me." Saying this, Chen Qingyao also deliberately shook Su Wan's arm. "I and brother Yushu are not fated. Even if others marry into Shin Fu in the future, no one would dare to bully you. You are the daughter of the Shin family. Who would dare to bully you?" Su Wan unobtrusively pulled out her arm from Chen Qingyao's hand, a smile on her face as she softly spoke. "Who said no one bullied me?" Chen Qingyao's gaze flashed and unobtrusively glanced at Chen Qingji not far away. "Wan Jiejie, I have something, but I don't know if I should tell you or not." "Oh? What is it?" Su Wan's face revealed curiosity, eagerly looking at Chen Qingyao's face. Chen Qingyao moved closer to Su Wan's side, pulled her sleeve, and whispered in her ear. "Wan Jiejie, do you still remember Yuru's matter last time?" Yuru. Hearing Chen Qingyao's words, Su Wan's expression really became very complicated. Even her voice somewhat trembled. "You? What do you know?" I found the servant girl who brought everyone to the rear courtyard's wing room that day. After that incident, she was driven out of the Marquis Fu and sold to a brothel. I gave her a large sum of money and let her redeem herself. Only then did she help me carefully recall the scene of that day. She said she saw with her own eyes that Wan Jiejia, you, went to the rear courtyard by yourself. Afterwards, when she left, she also saw a person. That person was Yu. She seemed to have been following behind you. Chen Qingyao had indeed been secretly investigating that day's matter, and now she already had a result in her heart. Although she didn't know why Chen Qingjin wanted to do that, since she caught hold of Chen Qingjin's weakness, she naturally had to be good at using it. When Su Wan heard Chen Qingyao's words, she firmly bit her lips and made a very angry appearance. I remember, that day I drank a cup of tea, and it seemed to have been handed to me by Yu. Afterwards, I felt a bit stuffy, so I went outside to get some wind. As a result, I saw Yu Shuji's figure flash by. I originally wanted to look for him to talk, but unknowingly, I was led to the rear courtyard by that figure. Then, someone knocked me out from behind. That person, could it be Yu? But why did she want to harm me? As Su Wan spoke, she revealed an extremely angry expression. Wan Jiejia, Yu is only a servant. How could she have the ability and courage to scheme against you? I'm guessing that there must be someone instigating her from behind. Speaking till here, Chen Qingyao imperceptibly glanced at Chen Qingjin not far away. It's Chen Qingjin? It's Chen Qingjin, right? Su Wan's tone suddenly became fierce. I knew it was her. It must be her. Wan Jiejia, don't be so agitated. Seeing Su Wan being so supportive, Chen Qingyao revealed an expression of wanting to say something but hesitating. Although Jiejia likes to pester Gij, but Jiejia, she wouldn't be so vicious, right? Jiejia, she. She's deliberately trying to separate me and Yu Shuji, this slut. At this time, Su Wan seemed to completely not hear Chen Qingyao's dissuasion. She suddenly took large strides forward and walked in front of the short table that Chen Qingjin was sitting at. Picking up the wine pot on the table, Su Wan didn't even look and opened the lid, pouring the entire pot of wine onto Chen Qingjin's face. Chen Qingyao, who rushed over, cried out in alarm and immediately successfully attracted everyone's gazes. Su Wan, what are you doing? Chen Qingjin, whose face was suddenly drenched with wine, also stood up at this time and inexplicably looked at the angry Su Wan in front of him. Doing what? I want to properly teach you, slut, a lesson today. Su Wan raised her brows and looked at Chen Qingjin with a face full of contempt. Chen Qingjin, you're playing dirty tricks behind people's backs. What kind of skill is scheming? Didn't you just want to separate me and Yu Shuji? Now that you've gotten what you want, aren't you especially proud? Young Miss Su, what are you doing? Wanner, don't mess around. At this time, Yushir and Lushir also brought a group of official Furins and rushed over. Under the dissuasion of the crowd, Su Wan, who was in a fit of anger, raised her eyes and swept her gaze over the crowd. Today, I want to expose Chen Qingjin's true colors in front of everyone. Last time in Marquis Qingchuan Fu, it was she who played dirty tricks behind my back and wanted to harm me. Seeing that she couldn't harm me, she pushed her personal maid out to be a scapegoat. Hearing Su Wan's words, the crowd burst into exclamations. The majority of the people who came to attend the banquet today were witnesses of that matter. At this time, when they heard Su Wan's revelation, they were all shocked. Yushir and her daughter, Chen Qingyao, unobtrusively looked at each other, and when Lushir heard Su Wan's words, her expression immediately turned cold and her gaze ruthlessly stared at Chen Qingjin. Young Miss Su, catch the thief and get the stolen goods. Don't listen to other people's misleading words and casually slander others. Compared to Su Wan's, flustered and exasperated. Although Chen Qingjin cut a sorry figure at this time, the expression on her face looked especially calm and unperturbed. You and my Gij have an engagement. You can also be considered as my future sister-in-law. Gij has always treated me well. Why would I want to harm you? It's because Yu Shuji treats you well that you want to harm me even more. Because you, this shameless slut, like Yu Shuji. Su Wan raised her chin and looked at Chen Qingjin with disdain. To deal with a person like Chen Qingjin, if you reason with her and talk about evidence, you might be brought into the ditch by her. Suwon preferred a more simple and crude method to deal with this kind of person. Don't you think that I'm willful and rash? Then older sister will be willful for you to see today. You. Hearing Suwon's words, Chun Qing-jin's complexion turned green. You're maliciously slandering me. Chen Qing-jin and Chen Yushu were biological brother and sister, and because the relationship between the brother and sister had always been especially good, they had always been the object of envy of many noble children. At this time, hearing Suwon say that Chun Qing-jin actually liked her own Gij, everyone in the crowd looked at Chun Qing-jin with strange gazes. Chapter 123. Those who were invited by the Empress Dowager to attend the banquet in the back palace were naturally noble ladies. These noble ladies were used to being elegant and indifferent in front of others. Even if they were fighting in their own residences, they were definitely experts in putting on an act. Everyone had never seen such a brazen shrew quarrel like Suwon before. At this time, Chun Qing-jin was also trembling with anger because of Suwon. Even if she was normally rational and indifferent, being slandered by Suwon in front of everyone's eyes, the anger in her heart couldn't help but rise. Suwon, if you speak irresponsibly again, don't blame me for being impolite. Chun Qing-jin suppressed her anger and fiercely glared at Suwon in front of her. Seeing Chen Qing-jin get angry, Suwon somewhat contemptuously smiled. What? You flew into a rage out of humiliation after being exposed by me in front of everyone? Chen Qing-jin, look at you. It's the new year and everyone is dressed jubilantly. Only you are dressed as if your mother died. Sorry, I almost forgot that your mother died a long time ago. Seeing that Suwon not only didn't know how to restrain herself, but also deliberately talked about her mother who died early, Chun Qing-jin could no longer suppress the anger in her heart. She suddenly raised her arm and waved it, wanting to hit Suwon's face. You don't have the qualifications to talk about my mother. You're not worthy. Pa. Chun Qing-jin's hand was struck down in midair by Suwon, who was already prepared. I'm not worthy? Suwon narrowed her eyes and coldly looked at Chun Qing-jin in front of her. Whether I'm worthy or not, it's Chin Foreign who has the final say. And whether I'm worthy or not, it's also Chen Yushu who has the final say. Chun Qing-jin, what do you think you are? As a daughter, do you hold a memorial service for your deceased mother every year? As a younger sister, you deliberately broke up your own older brother's marriage. Have you ever thought about your older brother's feelings? A person like you actually keeps on saying that I, Suwon, am not worthy. Hearing Suwon's words, Chun Qing-jin stared blankly, and the surrounding people couldn't help but keep quiet. They had never seen such an overbearing Suwon. In the past, in order to express goodwill to Chen Yushu, Suwon would regularly visit Chen Foreign's grave every year to pay her respects. At that time, she was regarded as a love-struck fool and was the joke of the entire imperial capital. Now, listening to Suwon's words, those noble ladies couldn't help but become silent. In the midst of everyone's silence, Chun Qing-jin's expression became even more unsightly. Before her rebirth, she had been deceived by Yushu's hypocrisy and had always treated her as her own mother. And after her rebirth, she had always been thinking of taking revenge on all the people who had wronged her in her previous life. Chun Qing-jin simply did not have the time or the mind to pay respects to her mother who had died early. Hatred had long blinded Chun Qing-jin's eyes, making her unable to see the affection and love of this world. What she saw was only betrayal and deception, only disgust and hatred. At this time, feeling everyone's peculiar gazes looking at her and seeing Suwon's arrogant face in front of her, Chun Qing-jin once again recalled her miserable past life. She thought of the unborn child that had died innocently in her womb. For a moment, sorrow rose in her heart. She couldn't care too much, and with a pale face, she rushed towards Suwon in front of her. In the previous life, if it wasn't because of Suwon's obstruction, her brother would definitely seek justice for her, and she wouldn't have ended up buried in the fire. Thinking of this, Chun Qing-jin's gaze towards Suwon carried a bone-deep hatred. Seeing Chun Qing-jin rushing towards her, Suwon only smiled. Just as she was about to make a move, the sharp and urgent voice of an attendant suddenly came from the entrance of the main hall. The Empress Dowager has arrived. The Empress Dowager had arrived. When everyone in the main hall heard the announcement, their complexions greatly changed. While tidying up their makeup, they quickly returned to their positions. The Empress Dowager has arrived. Jejia, don't be impulsive. Seeing that the Empress Dowager's phoenix carriage was about to enter the door, Chen Qingyao, who had been watching from the side with cold eyes, suddenly stepped forward. While persuading, she pulled on the corner of Chen Qingjin's clothes. Let go. Chen Qingjin still hadn't become muddle-headed from anger. She knew that Chen Qingyao's sudden action at this time was definitely not good intentions. So she quickly raised her hand and lightly pushed Chen Qingyao. She originally wanted to push her away and let her not hinder her, but when Chen Qingyao retreated, she was seemingly unintentionally tripped by Suwan beside her. Her whole body's center of gravity was unstable, and she swayed and fell to the ground. Her bright and clean forehead just happened to hit the jade floor of the main hall, and in an instant, bright red blood flowed out. This unforeseen event happened so suddenly that when Yushi reacted and rushed over to hold her daughter, the Empress Dowager's phoenix carriage had already entered the main hall. In the main hall, who is so presumptuous? At this time, the main hall was somewhat chaotic. When the attendant saw the scene in the main hall, his eyes couldn't help but turn cold and he loudly berated. Yushi hugged Chen Qingyao, whose forehead was bleeding, and tremblingly kneeled on the ground, not knowing how to answer for a moment. And Chen Qingjin at the side was the first to recover at this time. She courteously bowed to the Empress Dowager. There wasn't any flustered expression on her face. This subject's daughter Chen Qingjin greets the Empress Dowager. May the Empress Dowager be blessed and safe. In the previous life, Chen Qingjin was very familiar with the Empress Dowager's temperament and nature. She knew that the Empress Dowager was not an unreasonable person, and the Empress Dowager also appreciated those people who were not afraid in the face of danger. So right now, Chen Qingjin was calm and composed. She even thought of an excuse. As long as the Empress Dowager opened her mouth and asked what the current situation was, she would definitely say that Su Wan deliberately slandered her. Hearing Chen Qingjin's words, the Empress Dowager, who was dressed in luxurious clothing, only lightly raised her eyes to glance at her. Immediately after, the Empress Dowager's gaze fell on Su Wan's face. Seeing Su Wan also standing in the middle of the main hall with a pale face, the Empress Dowager couldn't help but frown. Su Jia's girl, what's wrong? Are you scared? Come over to Aijia's side. Let Aijia take a look. Chen Qingjin. Everyone. Empress Dowager. When Su Wan heard the Empress Dowager's voice, she immediately had an aggrieved face and pitifully rushed to the Empress Dowager's side. Empress Dowager, you came at the right time. Just now, Chen Qingjin wanted to hit me, and Qingyao Mimi stopped her at the side. In the end, she pushed me to the ground and even injured my forehead. Empress Dowager, you have to uphold justice for this official's daughter. Empress Dowager, you must not listen to Su Wan's one-sided words. The cause of the matter is actually... Chen Qingjin saw Su Wan inverting right and wrong in front of the Empress Dowager. She couldn't wait to open her mouth to defend herself, but halfway through her words, she was interrupted by the Empress Dowager's cold and dignified voice. Impudent! Did Aijia allow you to speak? The Empress Dowager coldly looked at Chen Qingjin, who was dressed in plain silk, and instinctively disliked her. What's more, she actually dared to bully her future daughter-in-law? Thinking of her little son who had a bitter life, finally found a likable person with great difficulty, and was already preparing to get married. How could she, as the Empress Dowager, allow her future daughter-in-law to be bullied by others in her own territory? Yushi, tell me what's going on? The Empress Dowager's gaze turned and immediately fell on Yushi and her daughter, who were not far away. Yushi's expression was somewhat complicated. Replying to the Empress Dowager, my daughter Chen Qingjin and eldest young Miss Su had some misunderstanding. She didn't really want to make a move against eldest young Miss Su. I hope that the Empress Dowager will investigate clearly. Yushi's voice trembled, seemingly wanting to defend Chen Qingjin, but in reality, she was confirming the fact that Chen Qingjin committed violence in the palace. Sure enough, after hearing Yushi's words, the Empress Dowager's expression immediately became gloomy and cold. She lowered her eyes and coldly glanced at Chun Qingjin. Then her gaze softly looked at Su Wan in front of her. Su Jia's girl, are you hurt? Quickly let Ijia see. This official's daughter is fine. It's just that Qing Yao Mimi she. Su Wan deliberately dragged out the last word, her gaze falling on Chen Qingyao, who was not far away. At this time, Chen Qingyao's thoughts were the most complicated among everyone. All along, Chen Qingyao felt that she was extremely intelligent. Regardless of whether it was Chen Qingjin or Su Wan, they were all trash that was toyed with by her in the palm of her hand. But today, she only knew that her seemingly innocent Jiejia also had such a calm and collected side. And that idiot eldest young Miss Su, who she had always treated as cannon fodder, was even more amazing with a single brilliant feat. Just now, Chen Qingyao saw with her own eyes that Su Wan deliberately tripped her, and now, she was crying out for her injustice in front of the Empress Dowager. It was only at this moment that Chen Qingyao suddenly discovered that the Su Wan in front of her eyes was really unfamiliar. She wasn't at all like the idiot eldest young miss she knew before. Perhaps, the current her was the most real her? Come, help Chunjia's young miss to leave first and summon the imperial physician to treat her. The Empress Dowager gave an order and palace maids immediately stepped forward to help Chun Qingyao away from Yusher's arms. Waiting until Chen Qingyao was helped away, the Empress Dowager coldly berated. Chun Qingjin, publicly acting violently in the main hall, do you know your crime? This subject's daughter doesn't know. Seeing that the Empress Dowager was intentionally biased towards Su Wan, Chun Qingjin's heart refused to accept it. She couldn't help but raise her eyes and meet the Empress Dowager's eyes. This subject's daughter still has something to say. Today's matter was clearly Su Wan. Io. Su Wan's scream once again interrupted Chun Qingjin's words. Chen Qingjin's expression was unsightly as she looked at Su Wan exaggeratedly holding her forehead. My head hurts. I don't know if it was because of her anger. Empress Dowager, it's all Xiao Wan's fault. Xiao Wan shouldn't have provoked young Miss Chen and shouldn't have argued with her. Today was originally a great day, but Xiao Wan disappointed Empress Dowager. Empress Dowager, please punish me. As she spoke, Su Wan assumed a posture of kneeling down to admit her mistake. Not waiting for the people at the side to react, the Empress Dowager had already personally bent down to support Su Wan's arms. This action once again stunned the little fellows in the room. What kind of luck did this eldest young Miss Su have? She was actually so favored by the Empress Dowager? Su Wan, the Empress Dowager's son is my backer. Would I speak irresponsibly? Xiao Wan, don't say that. Right and wrong, justice is in the hearts of people. AI Jia will uphold justice for you. This Xiao Wan, the Empress Dowager said it smoothly. The people at the side were already speechless. The Empress Dowager was His Majesty's birth mother. The young misses present were all around the same age as the current princes, who had the ability to let the Empress Dowager directly call them by their names. Even the crown princess didn't have that privilege. Under the dumbstruck gazes of the group of people, only Lusher could remain unperturbed with an indifferent face. That's right, this old mother's daughter will be Jean Wangfei in the future, His Majesty's younger sister-in-law, the Empress Dowager's daughter-in-law. Even the crown prince will have to call her imperial aunt when he sees her, and pay respect to seniority. Thinking of this, Lusher's mood was exceptionally comfortable. All right, in fact, according to seniority and status, marrying Jean Xinwang really wasn't bad. Chapter 124. The New Year's Eve banquet in the rear palace hall was still going on, but the Chenjia sisters had no fate with tonight's banquet. Chun Qingyao was supported to the side hall to look at her injuries, while Chen Qingjin was punished to meditate in another side hall because she offended the Empress Dowager. Compared to the circumstances of the Chenjia sisters, Su Wan received the Empress Dowager's special favor. Not only did the Empress Dowager let Su Wan sit next to her to eat, she even personally picked food for her with a smile on her face. This kind of special treatment made the noble ladies and furins at the side numb. It's said that the bird that sticks out is shot. Today, Su Wan was in the limelight at the banquet. If it was someone else, they would have long been treading on thin ice. Unfortunately, our family's eldest young Miss Su was famous for being heartless. The banquet was only halfway through, and Suwon excused herself in advance with the reason that she was not feeling well. Not only did the Empress Dowager not blame her, she even specially called her personal maid to support Suwon to the adjacent side hall to have a good rest. The side hall that the Empress Dowager arranged for Suwon was naturally excellent. As soon as Suwon entered the door, she felt the warm air inside. At this moment, the stove in the room was burning just right. On the soft couch beside the stove, there was a slender and thin figure. He wore a purple official robe and had a head of black hair that was as smooth as ink that draped over his shoulders. The palace maid behind him didn't seem surprised to see the person in the side hall. She took a step forward and bowed respectfully. "This servant greets Ninth Wangya." This palace maid was also an old person by the Empress Dowager's side. Naturally, she habitually called Qin Mu Yin Ninth Wangya. Hearing the palace maid's words, Su Rue impatiently waved his hand. That palace maid immediately tactfully retreated. At this time, only Suwon and Su Rue were left in the side hall. "Happy New Year." The two people coincidentally spoke at the same time and then looked at each other and smiled. "Come and sit." Su Rue patted the spot on his side. Suwon saw his action and unhesitatingly walked to Su Rue's side and sat next to him. "You told the Empress Dowager about our matter?" Tonight, the Empress Dowager took special care of Suwon as soon as they met. At that time, Suwon thought of this, and then she didn't hesitate to take advantage of the situation. Hearing Suwon's words, Su Rue raised his eyes to look at Suwon's face and said with a serious face, "I know that Chun Qingjin is not your opponent, but I won't allow anyone to bully you, even if they have that thought. As long as I'm here, this world, the next world, every world, no one can bully you. No one can bully you, not even me." Hearing Su Rue's words, Suwon couldn't help but smile. "You're childish, but I like it." While speaking, Suwon already involuntarily leaned her head on Su Rue's shoulder. "After the new year, this mission is almost over. I also don't want Xinqing Jin's life. Like this, you and I each get half of the mission points. What do you say?" In the past, Suwon was very obsessed with mission points, but now, she felt that she no longer needed to work so hard to earn points. Hearing Suwon's words, Su Rue, who was beside her, only lightly nodded his head. "I'll listen to you." From the moment he decided on her, to Su Rue, in his entire life, the most important thing was only Suwon. Everything else was just fleeting clouds. Raising his hand and gently embracing Suwon's slender waist, the corner of Su Rue's lips involuntarily raised into a gentle smile. On the lively New Year's Eve, in the quiet side hall, the two people quietly snuggled together, peacefully and comfortably silently experiencing their first and last New Year's Eve in the Daqing dynasty. At midnight, dazzling fireworks rose in the sky above the imperial city. A new year had begun. Chun Qingjin, who was punished to reflect in the ice-cold side hall, looked at the brilliant fireworks outside the window through the crack of the window. For a moment, her heart was filled with mixed feelings. She didn't know what she did wrong. She originally thought that after being reborn, she could turn the clouds and rain with one turn of the hand, but she didn't expect that this time, she would actually fall into the hands of Suwon, who she had always looked down upon. This made Chun Qingjin very unreconciled. She blankly stared at the fireworks in midair, lost in thought. When she returned to her senses, she suddenly caught a glimpse of a familiar figure from the corner of her eyes. Wasn't that Qin Qingyao? Once she saw her past life's enemy, Chun Qingjin's expression immediately became serious. She personally watched Qin Qingyao's figure disappear into the night. Thinking of the Empress Dowager's punishment towards her, Chun Qingjin hesitated for a moment. In the end, she still quietly pushed open the door of the side hall. Taking advantage of the gap when no one was paying attention, she quickly followed the direction Chun Qingyao left in the middle of the night. The palace road leading from the rear palace to the central palace was still brightly lit. As if afraid of being seen by others, Qin Qingyao, who was in front, kept picking an unmanned path and slowly walked forward. Chun Qingjin held her breath and quietly followed behind her. Not long after, the two people had already left the rear palace and arrived at the imperial garden at the back of the central palace. In the cold winter, only the winter plum blossoms were still proudly standing upright in the imperial garden. Chen Qingjin followed Chen Qing Yao all the way to the side of the pond in the center of the imperial garden. Chen Qing Yao, who was in front, suddenly disappeared. Chen Qingjin rubbed her eyes. In the pitch-black night in the quiet garden, where was Chen Qing Yao's shadow? This is bad. Chen Qingjin knew that she had fallen into a trap. Her expression changed greatly, and she turned to leave. But the moment she turned, a slender figure floated in front of her like a ghost. Caught off guard, she saw a face that looked exactly the same as her own, and Chen Qingjin suddenly screamed. And the other, Chen Qingjin, in front of her gave a strange smile and lightly lifted her arms to push forward. Splash! Chen Qingjin's entire person was pushed into the pond. It was reasonable to say that the pond water should have frozen at this time, but the place she fell into happened to be the ice hole that the palace eunuchs chiseled out to clean the bottom of the pond and feed the winter fishes. The bone-piercing cold surrounded Chen Qingjin's entire person in an instant. Her consciousness gradually blurred, and before she completely lost consciousness, she heard the woman on the shore use her own voice to desperately shout, "Help! Help ah!" The sharp and panicked cry for help drifted in the quiet imperial garden and fell into the ears of the people who had just entered the entrance of the imperial garden. At this time, everyone had just finished the banquet and were preparing to accompany His Highness the Crown Prince to the imperial garden to enjoy the fireworks and palace lanterns. As a result, once they entered the entrance of the imperial garden, they heard a woman's cry of alarm coming from the garden. This voice may be somewhat unfamiliar to other people, but Chen Yushu and Qin Ting immediately recognized that this was Chen Qingjin's voice. Qin Ting, who had been suffering from not being able to perform in front of the beautiful woman, had his eyes brighten at this time. Without waiting for Chen Yushu to move, he had already rushed out. Following the direction of the voice, Qin Ting dashed to the side of the pond. Looking at the ice hole in front of him that was emitting cold air, Qin Ting's footsteps paused. As the son of the current empress, Qin Ting was born with extraordinary dignity. In these 10 years, his life could be said to be smooth sailing, and he had never suffered the slightest bit of hardship. The ice-cold pond water in front of him could be felt with the naked eye. Once he jumped in, the cold air would definitely enter his body. Just as Qin Ting hesitated, he saw another figure jump in without hesitation.
That was
"Your Second Highness." Everyone at the side looked at Qin Yu, who jumped into the water in astonishment. Even Chen Yushu, who had rushed over and was preparing to enter the water, stared blankly in place. All along, Chen Yushu knew that the fifth prince had a favorable impression of his younger sister. However, he didn't expect that at such a dangerous juncture, the fifth prince would hesitate and the always silent second prince would enter the water to save her without the slightest hesitation. Not long after, the surface of the water swayed and Qin Yu dragged the already unconscious Chen Qingjin ashore. Qingjin. Chen Yushu anxiously wanted to move forward, but Qin Yu stiffened his body and held Chen Qingjin in his arms. "General Chen, don't touch her. Quickly call the imperial physician." Everyone's trip to the imperial garden was unexpectedly interrupted by Chen Qingjin. The crown prince immediately had people summon the imperial physician over, and a group of people followed Qin Yu's figure until Chen Qingjin was sent to a palace in the middle palace, Qin Yu. It didn't take long for the news of Chen Qingjin falling into the water to spread to the inner palace. Hearing this news, Yushu's complexion greatly changed, and the Empress Dowager, who was sitting on the high seat, had a gloomy expression. Why did Chen Qingjin, who was supposed to reflect in the side hall, secretly go to the imperial garden? Moreover, it just so happened that when His Highness the Crown Prince brought all the gongzi to the imperial garden, she just happened to fall into the water? How could there be such a coincidental thing in this world? Chapter 125. After New Year's Eve, Chen Qingjin was grounded by Marquis Qingchuan, Chen Che, in the rear courtyard of the Marquis Fu to reflect on his mistakes. But this did not prevent the nobles in the capital from continuing to talk behind Chen Qingjin's back. Everyone was idle all day, and now that there was such good material delivered to their doorstep, it was enough for those idle gongzi and noble ladies to make up 9 times 981 different versions of Chen Qingjin's memoirs. Regarding Chen Qingjin's matter, Su Wan no longer cared about it. Right now, Marquis Jingning Fu was preparing for Su Wan and Su Rui's marriage. The entire Marquis Fu was a bustling scene. After the Lantern Festival, the news that Marquis Jingning Fu wanted to unite by marriage with Jin Qinhuang Fu finally slowly spread in the capital. Once this news came out, it immediately replaced Chun Qingjin's scandal and became the hottest topic in the capital this year. The officials and common people of the imperial capital all knew that the always weak Jin Qinhuang, Qin Mu Yin, had never been close to women, but why did he take a fancy to Marquis Jingning Fu's young Miss Su? It was rumored in the streets that ninth Wang Ye and young Miss Su were fated because of a white tiger king. The two of them felt like old friends at first sight and regretted not meeting earlier. Young Miss Su's natural, Mei, lively, Mei Fei personality also made ninth Wang Ye, who had been lonely for more than 20 years, feel moved. Moreover, everyone knew that these past few years, young Miss Su had been bitterly and infatuated with General Shan. It was a pity that the goddess had a heart, but Xiang Wangye had no dreams. Although the two of them also had an engagement, regarding Su Wan's one-sided efforts, Shin Yushu had never directly given her any response. In this way, compared to the ninth Wangye who treated people with kindness and gentleness, it was reasonable for Su Wan to fall in love with someone else. When Shin Yushu found out that Su Wan was going to marry Qin Mu Yin, he was leading the Black Tiger Army soldiers in the training grounds of the capital. The one who told Shin Yushu the news was the general in the army. Su Wan was getting married? When Shin Yushu heard this news, he was stunned for a moment. His hands unconsciously loosened and the weapon in his hand immediately fell to the ground, sending up countless dust. General? The general at the side looked at his general hesitantly, regretting that he had spoken too quickly. I'm fine. Shin Yushu came back to his senses and straightened his face. You guys go ahead and train first. I will go out for a bit. There were some matters that Shin Yushu should have gone to find Su Wan and explained it clearly to her face. It's just that he was too busy training his troops these days and, at the bottom of his heart, he was subconsciously unwilling to go and confront Su Wan. Regarding that matter, regardless of whether what Su Wan said was true or false, it would still make Shin Yushu feel uncomfortable. After many days, he once again arrived at the entrance of Marquis Jingning Fu. Shin Yushu looked at the busy servants hanging red silk at the entrance, and his gaze slightly congealed. The bright red satin was glaring and dazzling. In the past, as long as Shin Yushu came to Marquis Jingning Fu, he would be unimpeded. But today, he was stopped at the door waiting for the steward's announcement. When Shin Yushu finally saw Su Wan, it was already a quarter of an hour later. The weather in the first month was still chilly. Su Wan was wrapped in a snow-white fur cloak, and in her hand was the green plum blossom that she had just picked from the backyard. Young Master Shen, what brings you here? Walking into the hall, Su Wan's body still carried the cold air that had yet to disperse. She stamped her feet and raised her hand to hand over the green plum blossom in her hand to the servant girl in the hall. Seeing Su Wan calmly sit on a wooden chair at the side, Shin Yushu calmly looked at her. I heard that you were getting married and specially came to congratulate you. Thank you. Su Wan faintly smiled at Shin Yushu. Are you still going to drink Da Hong Pao today? I'll call someone to brew it for you. No need. Shin Yushu waved his hand at Su Wan, his gaze gradually becoming deep. Actually, I still have a matter that I want to make clear to you this time. Speaking to here, Shin Yushu's expression was slightly hesitant. He suddenly didn't know what to say. If those rumors were true, how should he face his own younger sister in the future? And if those rumors were all fabricated by Su Wan, then what kind of mood should he use to face Su Wan? Seeing Shin Yushu sitting there as if in a dilemma, Su Wan couldn't help but take the initiative to speak. It's because of Chen Qingjin's matter, right? Hearing Su Wan take the initiative to speak, Shin Yushu stared blankly and subconsciously raised his eyes. A pair of pitch-black pupils tightly stared at Su Wan's face. Under Shin Yushu's attentive gaze, Su Wan still had an indifferent expression. Regardless of whether you believe it or not, every word that I said in the inner palace that day is true. If you don't believe it, you can investigate it yourself. Of course, with our current relationship, no, it should be said that I have always been unimportant in your heart. So, you can choose not to believe me. I also won't blame you. After all, it's all in the past. Some things have already passed, and there's not much meaning in looking into it. Hearing Su Wan say this, Shin Yushu didn't say anything. He just quietly looked at Su Wan's eyes, as if wanting to see through her with a glance. You broke off the engagement with me at that time. Was it because of Qing Jin? Or was it because of Jin Qin Wang? No proud man was willing to admit that he was the one who was abandoned. Shin Yushu was no exception. Is there still any meaning in saying this now? Su Wan lowered her eyes and somewhat irritably tightened the cloak on her body. She was no longer willing to look at Shin Yushu face to face. She didn't admit it, nor did she deny it. This made Shin Yushu's mood very vexed. However, what else was there to be vexed about? He and she had long become strangers who had no relationship with each other. Walking out of Marquis Jingning Fu, Shin Yushu glanced back at the gilded plaque of the Marquis Fu under the sunlight. In this lifetime, he would probably never take half a step into this place again. Smiling somewhat self-deprecatingly, Shin Yushu was about to turn around and leave when he suddenly caught a glimpse of a familiar figure from the corner of his eyes. That was eldest young master. When you stood in the small alley outside the walls of Marquis Jingning Fu, quietly looking at Shin Yushu who was not far away. This word, eldest young master, made Shin Yushu's gaze congeal. He quickly walked to the entrance of the alley and coldly looked at the woman in front of him. Yuru? Right now, the woman in front of him was much thinner and more haggard than the Yuru in Shan Yushu's memory. Eldest young master, this servant is now called Wen Yu, eldest young Miss Su's personal maid. When you lightly saluted Shin Yushu and informed him of her current identity, you said that you're Su Wan's. What's going on? Shin Yushu's thoughts were already disrupted by Wen Yu's words. Qing Jian said that you were beaten to death by Chen Mian. How could you? This servant indeed almost lost her life. It was young Miss Su who saved this servant and gave this servant a new life. Speaking up to here, Wen Yu firmly bit her lips. She took a deep breath and suddenly knelt in front of Shin Yushu as if she had made up her mind. Eldest young master, this servant deserves to die 10,000 times for her crimes. This servant is guilty. This servant has let down young Miss Su. Let down eldest young master. Yuru, you. Shin Yushu's heart shook. Although he had already thought of a certain possibility, he didn't dare to be sure. Could it be that what Su Wan said was true? It really was Qing Jin. It was Qing Jin. She. Yes. When you clenched her teeth and finally admitted this matter, it was young Miss Qing Jin who instigated this servant to frame young Miss Su. That day's matter was all single-handedly arranged by young Miss Qing Jin, and this servant assisted from the side. This matter had already been suppressed in Wen Yu's heart for far too long and had already become a sore point that could not be removed. And now, she finally had the courage to say everything. When Wen Yu told Shin Yushu the plan that day without missing a word, Shin Yushu's complexion was already extremely unsightly. He didn't think that the little sister that he had always doted on would actually be malicious to this degree. Now that he thought about it, Qing Jin seemed to have never liked Su Wan, but this could not become a reason for her to harm others. It must be known that a woman's reputation and integrity in the Daqing dynasty was something more important than her life. Not only did Qing Jin want to destroy Su Wan's reputation, she also wanted to push her to Chen Mian. What kind of trash was Chen Mian? Once he thought of how Su Wan was almost defiled by Chen Mian that day, Shin Yushu couldn't help but tightly clench his fists. Seeing Shin Yushu's tightly clenched fists and the blood red in his eyes, Wen Yu once again hardened her heart. She slowly raised her head and looked at Shin Yushu with a serious face. Eldest young master, do you know why young Miss Su broke the engagement? Why was she willing to marry Jin Qinwang? What else do you know? Tell me. Wen Yu's words made Shin Yushu recover from his anger. He knew that what Wen Yu was going to say next was perhaps what she truly wanted to tell him, and this answer, perhaps, was not what he wanted to know. Marquis Jingning Fu, rear courtyard. After sending off Shin Yushu, Su Wan brought Wen Yu back to her boudoir. Today, the Imperial Clothing Bureau had already brought the wedding dress over. This was the Wang Fei's wedding dress that the Empress Dowager had decreed. The bright red wedding dress was made of the best and most expensive red snow satin. The edges were lined with golden threads and embroidered with auspicious cloud patterns. On the chest area was a pair of lively mandarin ducks intertwined with each other, and the hem of the skirt was inlaid with smooth and round pearls from the Eastern Sea. This wedding dress was priceless and was comparable to the Empress Phoenix gown. Young miss, this wedding dress is too beautiful. The Empress Dowager and Wangya are really too good to you. When you saw the priceless wedding dress that was neatly arranged on the bed and her pair of eyes were emitting a golden light, Su-won slowly walked to the bedside and raised her hand to lightly touch this somewhat familiar wedding dress. This wedding dress was indeed custom-made according to the Empress specifications. Not the Empress of the Daqing dynasty, but the Empress of the Daxia dynasty. Su-won somewhat absent-mindedly remembered that in that world, she and Su Rue met for the first time and separated for the first time. At that time, she was wearing this kind of wedding dress and in the end, disappeared from Su Rue's embrace. It turns out, he still remembered. It turns out, she also never forgot. The 8th day of the 2nd month, an auspicious day, suitable for marriage. In the center of the imperial capital, from Marquis Jingning Fu to Jin Xinwang Fu, the not-too-long street was occupied by a very long wedding procession. The sweet-sounding, joyous music spread throughout the imperial capital along with the cool breeze. Both sides of the long street were already surrounded by the common people of the imperial capital who came to watch the excitement. The guards of Jin Xinwang Fu were all wearing the same wedding dress, and Su Rue, who rarely went out, was also wearing a crimson python robe today, with a golden crown on his head. The people of the imperial capital only knew that Jin Xinwang was wise and far-sighted. Very few people had seen the true appearance of this Xinwang who lived in the legends. Now that Su Rue was riding a Fergana horse and wearing a solemn formal attire, appearing in front of everyone with a calm expression, it immediately caused a cry of surprise. It turns out that our family's Wangya was actually so peerless in his generation. The young girls of the imperial capital expressed that their hearts were about to break if they knew that Wangya was this handsome. This servant would also be willing to give birth to a monkey for you. In fact, according to Daqing's ancestral system, when a Qinwang got married, the groom didn't need to personally welcome him. He only needed to send a wedding procession to carry the bride's carriage to the Wang Fu's main entrance before the auspicious time. But this time, Su Rue still insisted on personally going to Marquis Jingning Fu to welcome him. Not everyone had this kind of opportunity to complete different weddings with their beloved in different worlds. Chapter 126. Marquis Jingning Fu's backyard, Su-won's boudoir. The red satin decorated the entire room with a joyous atmosphere. Su-won wore a bright red wedding dress and quietly sat upright in front of the bronze mirror. Lucia, who was behind her, also wore the court attire of a noblewoman. At this time, she was holding a comb and combing Su-won's hair with red eyes. The bronze mirror at the side reflected Su-won's face. Today, Lucia personally drew exquisite makeup for her and stuck a red plum blossom forehead ornament on her forehead. Looking at this young and exquisite face in the mirror, Su-won was slightly absent-minded. She had long been accustomed to the completely different appearances in each mission world. Appearance was never the most important thing to Su-won, but today, seeing Lucia working so hard for her, glancing at the tears at the corner of her eyes, as well as when Yu's red eyes from crying, Su-won's mood also became somewhat nervous. She never liked to be involved with the people in the mission world, but ever since she met Su Rue, her life changed a lot. It was the first time she married Su Rue in the mission world. At that time, he was still Fong family's eldest young master. The two people's wedding was like a show. After the wedding, the two people returned to their respective rooms and no longer intersected. And because of Su Xiaosu's existence, that wedding in the online game was so noisy that she didn't have any impression of it. This time, in this world, it was Su-won's first time taking a wedding seriously. This was her and Su Rue's big wedding. As long as she thought of Su Rue in her heart, Su-won would feel that her heart, which had been empty for a long time, was filled to the brim by him. The return of love is the return of the heart. The melodious, joyous music was getting closer and closer. When the deafening sound of firecrackers sounded at the entrance of Marquis Jingning Fu, Lucia finally held back the tears in her eyes and with trembling hands, she placed the 9 phoenix crown that symbolized the Qinwang Fei on Su-won's head. "Wanner, you're especially beautiful today." Lucia's voice was somewhat hoarse and choked with sobs. Su-won couldn't help but stand up and raise her hands to hold Lucifer's hands. Mother, daughter will be happy in this life, very happy. Although the original Su-won was only a short-lived cannon fodder, she had a pair of parents who loved her dearly. Su-won was actually a bit envious because she had never experienced the warmth of her parents and loved ones. So when she saw Lucifer forcefully endure her heartache and smile at her, Su-won couldn't help but lean into Lucifer's embrace and gently hug her. Mother, you and father have to live well in the future. Even if I'm not here, you guys have to live well. Child, what do you mean by no longer here? Child's words carry no harm. Lucifer pretended to be angry and patted Su-won's back. Although you've married out, you'll always be mother's sweetheart in this life. If Wangya bullies you, you tell mother and mother will absolutely not spare him. Mother, don't worry. His Highness treats me well. He won't let me down. Su-won smiled brilliantly at Lucifer. Seeing her daughter's sincere smile, Lucifer wiped away the tears at the corner of her eyes and earnestly took the gold-embroidered cloud robe from Wen Yu's hands and carefully draped it over Su-won's shoulders. Mrs. Su, Princess, it's the auspicious time. At this time, the clear and respectful voice of Jin Wangfu's maidservant rang outside the door. All right, it's the auspicious time. Taking a deep breath, Lucifer once again firmly grasped Su-won's hand. It's time to set off. And Su-won nodded, and under the support of Wen Yu, she arrived at the door and forcefully pushed open the door to the room. Outside the door, a familiar figure immediately entered Su-won's eyes, a slender and perfect figure, an unparalleled handsome appearance. Su-rue raised his eyebrows and the corners of his mouth slightly curled up as he stood outside Su-won's door. That crimson python robe made him look noble and elegant at this moment. Wangya? Lucifer, who was following behind Su-won, was also stunned. According to Daqing's customs, the bride only needed to be carried out of the courtyard by the matchmaker. Of course, because Su-won's identity was a princess, the person carrying her should have been Jin Wangfu's nanny in charge. But how did it suddenly become Wangya himself? Su-won, Ben Wang has come to take you home. Under the dumbstruck gazes of the bystanders, Su-rue walked step by step to Su-won. Then, with a confident and unrestrained turn, he very naturally bent down in front of Su-won. In this world, there was only this kind of person who was worthy of him, Su-rue, being willing to bow his head. Su-won pursed her lips and lifted her skirt to stand behind Su-rue. Looking at his broad and familiar back, the corner of Su-won's lips involuntarily curved. Just like before, her hands tightly embraced his neck, and then her whole body jumped onto his back, sticking her face on Su-rue's back. This was the action that made Su-won feel the most at ease. Seeing Su-rue carrying Su-won and leaving step by step, Lucifer stood at the door of her daughter's boudoir in a daze for a long time. In the end, she still smiled comfortably. Her precious daughter, she had always been unreliable. Fortunately, she was finally reliable for once in her marriage. In short, this son-in-law, Lucifer was finally satisfied this time. When Su-rue carried Su-won out of Marquis Jingning Fu's front door, it immediately caused a commotion in the crowd. Forgive Daqing's people for being simple and honest. When had the little friends in the capital seen such an open and above-board display of affection? This was simply blinding people's eyes, all right? Wangya Wangfei, Zhueyu, who had been guarding the sedan chair the whole time, saw the two people come out and immediately attentively and respectfully took out a stepping stool and placed it under the sedan chair. As a result, the conscientious child Zhueyu received Wangya Darren's cold eyes, adding an endless cold effect. Zhueyu. Wangya, I was wrong. I was really wrong. Please let me go. Zhueyu felt that his IQ had dropped recently. Wangya had personally carried Wang Fei out. Why did he still need to use a sedan chair? Wasn't this clearly separating the two people? Why didn't he have a good eye? Look at Zhue Feng. How fast has his business ability improved? He watched as Zhue Feng quietly led Su-rue's BMW over, and Su-rue finally smiled in satisfaction. He nimbly turned around and carried Su-won, who was on his back, in his arms. In the next moment, it was another handsome jump in the air. Su-rue carried Su-won and stepped on Zhue Feng's leg, directly sitting on the horse. Zhueyu. Dottie felt that he was about to lose his job. What to do? Oh, uh. Screams came from the surrounding crowd. It was very clear that everyone didn't expect Jin Xinwang to have this kind of skill. Right now, everyone's thoughts were, picking up a bride and you're already this desperate. Wang Ye, you're also quite desperate to get married. Wang Ye must really, really love eldest young Miss Su. Eldest young Miss Su is so blessed. Like this, it looks like the two of them are a perfect match. Don't want to just when everyone was still immersed in this very romantic scene. A discordant voice suddenly rang out not far away. Su Wan. Shin Yushu was wearing the Black Tiger Army's uniform and riding a date red steed. He suddenly appeared at the corner of the street of Marquis Jingning Fu with a somber aura. Su Wan, I have something to say to you. On the steed, Shin Yushu's expression was especially serious and solemn. Ever since that day when you told Shin Yushu about Su Wan's encounter, Shin Yushu's mood had been very restless. He didn't know how he should face Su Wan, and also didn't know what he should do for her. Just like this, the days passed day by day, and in the blink of an eye, it was the day of her and Qin Mu Yan's marriage. 10 Li of red, the sound of gongs and drums filled the sky. The entire imperial capital seemed to have sunk into a joyous celebration. Only Shin Yushu was incomparably clear-headed and regretful. Yes, only at the last moment did he become clear-headed. He clearly knew what he wanted. So, he came. Shin Yushu's appearance made the entire Jin Xinwang Fu's escort team act as if they were facing a great enemy. Your mother. One look and you can tell that they're here to snatch the bride. You dare to come single-handedly? Are you looking down on our Jin Xinwang Fu's people? While the Wang Fu's guards were glaring at him, Su Rue, who was sitting upright on the horse, only carelessly tidied up Su Wan's hair that was messed up by the wind. He then lazily raised his eyes and looked at Shin Yushu, who was not far away, with a face of indifference. Shin Darren, Bun Wang's Wang Fei has nothing to say to you. Hashtag, every time I get married, I always encounter a brainless ex-husband who comes to snatch the bride. I really want to kill them. What should I do? Hashtag, on this joyous day, Su Rue didn't want to see blood, so he patiently replied to Shin Yushu. But when Shin Yushu heard Su Rue's words, he didn't leave. Instead, he stared at Su Wan with a profound gaze. Su Wan, I know about your matters. I regret it now. I don't want to lose you. I am willing to marry you. Although after knowing what happened to Su Wan, Shin Yushu also hesitated and struggled, but in the end, he still felt that he couldn't miss a woman who loved him so deeply. Su Wan had once sacrificed a lot for him. The reason why she had that kind of experience was also because of him. As a man, Shin Yushu felt that he had the responsibility to be responsible for her life. Hearing Shin Yushu's affectionate confession, Su Wan finally raised her eyes and faintly looked at him. In fact, on the day that when you and Shin Yushu met, Su Wan already knew about it. She had been thinking whether or not Shin Yushu would come to look for her, and when he would appear. She didn't expect that he would choose to appear at such an unsuitable time. If on that day, Shin Yushu returned to Su Fu to confess to Su Wan, perhaps, Su Wan would still feel that Shin Yushu was a responsible and good man. But now, Shindarin, I also regret it. Su Wan lightly smiled at Shin Yushu. I regret that I once liked someone like you, coward. Su Wan. Shin Yushu received a blow to his heart from Su Wan. His expression was unsightly, and for a moment, he didn't know how to react. Let's go. Don't delay the auspicious time. Not caring about Shin Yushu's expression, Su Wan turned her head and softly whispered in Su Rue's ear. Su Rue nodded and directly ignored Shin Yushu's figure. Carrying Su Wan, he rode the horse and leisurely headed towards Jin Wangfu. Everyone in the Wangfu once again beat the gongs and drums. The entire journey was very lively and joyous, from Marquis Jingning Fu to Jin Wangfu. In the short journey, the two people received countless gazes and also heard many blessings from the common people. Su Rue had been tightly hugging Su Wan in his embrace, his pair of big hands also tightly holding her slender little hands. This pair of hands, once he held them, he would never let them go again. Unless he died. The imperial family's wedding was always particularly tedious and a waste of time. By the time Su Wan finished her ceremony and returned to the bridal chamber, Her entire person had already been tossed around until she didn't have any strength. Looking at the comfortable and soft dragon and phoenix couch in the bridal chamber, Su-won simply took off the heavy phoenix crown on her head and threw herself onto the bed. So comfortable, so comfortable that she didn't want it. Chapter 127. In the bridal chamber, the fiery red dragon and phoenix candles were burning brightly. Su-rue slowly walked to the bedside and lifted the golden curtain embroidered with peonies and lilies. Su-won was lying on the dragon and phoenix couch, sleeping peacefully. Because she took off the phoenix crown, her long hair was slightly disheveled, lazily and sexily pasted on the red cotton pillow. The collar of the red phoenix robe on her body was slightly open, revealing the cyan collar of the undergarments inside, as well as a large area of snow-white smooth skin. Su-rue sat on the bedside and quietly looked at Su-won. He looked at her delicate brows and looked at her defenseless expression when she was asleep. As he watched, Su-rue couldn't help but bend down and lightly kiss Su-won's lips like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water. He also didn't know what Su-won applied on her lips today. A slightly sweet breath drilled into Su-rue's nose. He took a deep breath and gently stuck out the tip of his tongue to lick Su-won's lips. The numbness and strange feeling between her lips made Su-won wake up from her deep sleep. Right now, her consciousness was still somewhat muddled. Feeling the familiar and peaceful aura lingering around her, Su-won's eyelashes trembled and she slowly opened her eyes. Meeting Su-rue's dark and gloomy gaze, Su-won blinked. "You're back?" And Su-rue nodded at Su-won and his gaze fell on her body. "Are you tired? What do you think?" Seeing that he already knew the answer, Su-won couldn't help but raise her eyebrows. She wore such a heavy phoenix crown and robe and accompanied him to complete the conferring ceremony. It took a few hours. How could she not be tired? "Oh." Seeing Su-won's somewhat resentful expression, Su-rue's gaze flashed. "Then don't drink the nuptial wine. If you're tired, go to sleep." And Su-won also didn't care much about the rules of this world. Hearing Su-rue's words, she nodded and lazily turned over. But just as she turned over, her entire body was forcefully pulled back by Su-rue. "At least undress before going to sleep, right? Seeing that you're this tired, I'll help you bathe and undress." Su-won didn't even have time to refuse when she was lifted up from the bed and carried all the way to the bathroom of the bridal room. The bathroom was filled with a faint mist. In order to prepare the bath for the bridal chamber, the servants in the mansion had already smoked the orchids. With the addition of the Western region spices given by the emperor, the whole pool was filled with a fragrant mist. Su-rue placed Su-won on the white jade by the side of the bathtub. A pair of big hands nimbly tore open the bright red wedding dress on her. The bright red color landed on the snow-white jade ground, exceptionally eye-catching. Right now, Su-won was only wearing a thin cyan inner garment. Her exquisite curves were faintly discernible under the cover of the thin garment. Su-rue's gaze involuntarily darkened and his breathing quickened. Feeling his slightly cold fingers touch the skin on her neckline, that electric shock made Su-won couldn't help but tremble. Su-rue, I'll do it myself." Su-won somewhat impatiently wanted to brush away Su-rue's big hands. But Su-rue first raised his hands and imprisoned Su-won's entire body in front of his chest. Then he carried her and directly jumped into the bath. The fragrance lingered and the water was misty. The warm water flow carried an intoxicating fragrance and attacked Su-won's nerves in an instant. She was absent-minded for a moment, and the next moment, Su-rue had already leaned against her ear and softly whispered, "Xiao-won, I love you. I love you." These 3 simple words, but they were the most pleasant to hear in this world. Su-won raised her eyes and looked at the familiar and charming outline of the man in front of her in the mist. She couldn't help but raise her hand and her fingers gently slid over Su-rue's eyebrows. "Su-rue, I love you too." What answered her was Su-rue's overwhelming kisses. Cloudy hair, golden hair ornaments, hibiscus tint warmed the spring night. The spring night is bitter and short. The sun rises high. From then on, the emperor does not attend morning court. When Su-won woke up the next day, it was already late in the morning. The side of the bed was empty. Su Rue had obviously gotten up a long time ago. Thinking that she should get up early this morning and go to the palace to pay respects to the Empress Dowager, Su Wan immediately struggled to get up. However, she was tossed around by Su Rue too ruthlessly last night. She only moved a little, and her whole body began to hurt endlessly. Especially a certain place under her body. It was simply unbearable. Su Rue. Su Wan couldn't help but roar. Her hoarse voice was full of anger. Beloved concubine, you're awake? Hearing the movements in the inner room, Su Rue, who had been busy in the bathroom, immediately put on a robe and walked over. He had just finished bathing and his body still carried the smell of cloud grass. This familiar fragrance made Su Wan recall the scenes in the bathroom last night. She immediately lowered her eyes and her face was a little hot. Why didn't you wake me up? Aren't you going to the palace this morning? I already sent someone to the palace to pass a message to the Empress Dowager. Su Rue walked to the bedside step by step, lowered his eyes and smiled at Su Wan. I told them to tell the Empress Dowager that Ninth Wangya was too tired last night and can't get up today. Su Wan, you're very tired, but you're more lively than anyone right now, okay? But thinking about it, the Empress Dowager and His Majesty will definitely believe this excuse. Who told our family's Wangya to be incapable in other people's eyes? Thinking of this, Su Wan's irritable mood finally eased a little. She raised her hand to support her body and wanted to get up, but the pain in her body made her involuntarily suck in a breath of cold air. Her face couldn't help but become a bit pale. Seeing Su Wan's sorry figure, Su Rue's gaze flashed. He immediately bent down and held her in his arms. Don't move, I'll help you bathe and change clothes. Don't. Su Wan somewhat panicked and blurted out. As soon as the words left her mouth, she awkwardly turned her face to the side. Su Rue smiled lowly and lowered his head to kiss her forehead. Last night, I couldn't control myself for a moment. Don't worry, it won't happen again. Don't be angry. Hearing Su Rue's gentle words, Su Wan's complexion eased a little. Unfortunately, Su Wan's knowledge in a certain aspect was still lacking. She didn't understand a principle. A man's words on the bed cannot be trusted, and the words off the bed sometimes cannot be trusted. At noon, Su Wan was finally able to reluctantly walk back and forth in the bridal room with Wen Yu's support. And at this time, Zhue Yu brought the servants of the Wang Fu to move all the items that had just been bestowed from the palace to the hall outside for Su Wan to personally look over. The Empress Dowager and His Majesty's gifts were dazzling and dazzling. Other than some gold, silver, and jewels for their daughter's household, the rest were all tonics, great tonics. Tonics for the kidney and yang. Su Wan's face darkened as she looked at the table of tonics. Wang Fei, look at these. Do you want to instruct the kitchen to prepare them? Feeling that Su Wan's pressure was a bit low, Zhue Yu's voice also lowered. Throw them away. Throw them all away. Right now, Su Wan's fire would rise as soon as she saw tonics. To hell with tonics for the kidney and yang. If your Wangya continued to take more, he would overturn the heavens, okay? She didn't want to be made to death in bed alive. Seeing Su Wan flip out, Zhue Yu immediately nodded in a hurry. He instructed everyone to leave all the jewels and accessories behind, and those tonics bestowed by the emperor were all carried out by Zhue Yu in his arms. Chapter 128. Ever since Su Wan and Su Rue's big wedding, news about the two of them had been the focus and topic of discussion in the capital. Because Jin Xinwang's way of welcoming the bride on the day of the wedding was too handsome, it led to the capital's aristocrats abandoning the bridal sedan and carriage for their wedding, and all changed to the bride and groom riding together. What? You said that you want to use the 8-person sedan to carry me in? You definitely don't love me anymore. You absolutely don't love me anymore. If you really love me, then you should ride together with me and be intimately intimate. The newly married Su couple, who inadvertently led the capital's new wedding trend, didn't know the situation outside. After Su Wan returned home on the 3rd day of their wedding, the two people rarely appeared. Most of the time, the two people listened to music in the Wang Fu and chatted. When they were bored, they would go to the rare beast garden and trample on Big White, who had already grown fat. As for a certain imperial family's orphan who was originally staying in Jin Wang Fu and wholeheartedly wanted to assassinate His Majesty, He had long been thrown beyond the highest heavens by Su Rue. In the blink of an eye, it was the 3rd month of spring. The weather began to gradually warm up. March was the season of peach blossoms and willows. Jin Wangfu's backyard also planted a few peach trees. Seeing that this year's peach blossoms were in full bloom, Su Wan couldn't help but exclaim a few words of praise. And Su Wan's words somehow reached Su Rue's ears. Not long after, our family's Wangya ordered people to transplant the peach blossom forest on the outskirts of the capital to the Wangfu's other courtyard. It was a huge house with 3 courtyards, and the courtyard was filled with peach trees that were in full bloom. Since then, there was another anecdote about Jin Wangya's lover in the capital, and the noble young masters and ladies who had been hiding in their respective mansions for the entire winter were ready to make a move when spring arrived. When they learned that Jin Wangfu's other courtyard was filled with peach blossom trees, like a peach blossom fairyland, some people's hearts began to run wild, wanting to encounter a romantic love like Jin Wangya and his wife in such a beautiful scenery. As a result, under the urging of a group of imperial relatives, Hunan Wang's heir apparent, Qin Xiang, personally went to Jin Wangfu to pay his respects. He tactfully asked Su Rue and Su Wan's intentions and learned that the children of the influential families wanted to hold a spring party in the Wangfu's other courtyard. Su Rue instinctively disliked it. Those peach blossoms were prepared by him for Su Wan. How could he casually let other people admire them? Fortunately, Su Wan quite liked lively scenes. In the end, she made the decision on this matter. As a result, the news of Jin Wangfei holding a spring party in Peach Blossom Courtyard began to spread like wildfire in the capital. Ever since Su Wan married into Jin Qinhuangfu, Marquis Qingchuanfu suffered all kinds of suppression in court. And because of Shun Yushu's impulsive actions on the day of the wedding, he was punished by His Majesty to stop all military affairs and shut himself in the Fu to ponder over his mistakes. The current Marquis Qingchuanfu, and 1 year ago, already had too many differences. Su Jia broke off the engagement with Shin Yushu, and Shun Qingjin's reputation was swept to the ground because of the matter on New Year's Eve. For the first time, Marquis Qingchuan, Qin Che, was disappointed with his D-son and D-daughter. He originally planned to take advantage of Shun Qingjin's youth and beauty to find a good home for her. This way, he would be able to have more help in court. Unfortunately, Shun Qingjin was now disliked by many aristocrats. Even 5th Prince Qinting, who had always had a good impression of Shin Qingjin, recently rarely went in and out of the Shin Fu. All of this made Qin Che feel vexed. Fortunately, he and Yushu still had a daughter, Shin Qingyao. Shin Qingyao had now reached the marriageable age, and Chen Che had always been looking for a suitable candidate for her. And this time, the spring party held by Jin Wangfu was a rare opportunity for Shan Qingyao. Jin Wangfu's spring party invitation was hard to get even with money. Su Wan also invited all the influential children of the capital she knew, according to the original owner's memory. And when she sent the invitation to Shunjia, Su Wan only sent one. As Su Wan expected, the person attending the Shunjia was indeed the second young miss, Shun Qingyao. Ever since she was injured in the inner palace, Shun Qingyao restrained herself a lot. She and Yushu were both smart people. After becoming aware of Shin Qingjin's evil intentions, mother and daughter were very careful in everything they did. They were very afraid of being caught by Shin Qingjin. This time in the Peach Blossom Courtyard, Shun Qingyao also scrupulously abided by her role. She was especially well-behaved and docile, and this kind of disguise really received the favor of a few gongzi. Seeing Shun Qingyao and an imperial family's child getting into a heated discussion, Su Wan calmly smiled. Jealousy can make people crazy, and a woman's jealousy is especially so. In the previous life, because Shen Qingyao was always jealous of her elder sister, she deliberately plotted and killed Shin Qingjin by hook or by crook. And in this life, Shin Qingjin watched as Shun Qingyao got better day by day. What would she do? Marquis Qingchuanfu, in the rear courtyard, Shun Qingjin's complexion turned green as she stared at her own face in the bronze mirror. Recently, she would often be woken up by nightmares. In that nightmare, there were the cries of babies everywhere, and there was a boundless fire. In the dream, she couldn't find a way out and could only be burned alive again. Everything in the previous life was still vivid in her mind, but Shun Qingjin couldn't help but clench her fists. She thought that after she was reborn, Everything could develop according to her imagination. However, everything in this world was different. Yu was no longer here. Su Wan gave up eldest brother and married Jin Xin Wang to become a Wang Fei. An eldest brother, he seemed to have always misunderstood her and was unwilling to get close to her. Shin Qingyao, that slut, became even smarter and more careful in this life. It was almost very difficult for her to grab hold of her and Yusher's weakness. She didn't know when everything started to break away from Shun Qingjin's control. The only one that made her feel at ease, perhaps, was only that person. Shin Qingjin's gaze was somewhat absent-minded. She once again remembered that day when she regained consciousness in the cold and stiff state, that man's deep and concerned gaze. Second Highness, Qin Yu. Shin Qingjin and he didn't have any interactions, but that day, he was the one who disregarded everything to save her when she fell into the ice cave. Moreover, that day, the gaze he looked at her with was too deep and enchanting, making Shan Qingjin involuntarily somewhat moved. After the spring garden gathering ended, there was another light rain in the imperial capital. This was the first spring rain of this year. A luxurious carriage slowly moved on the long street. When it passed by the main entrance of Marquis Qingchuan Fu, the curtain of the carriage was lifted by someone, revealing a well-defined and handsome face. Qin Yu stared blankly at the plaque of Marquis Qingchuan Fu that was somewhat obscured by the cyan-colored rain. He didn't know why, but he remembered a certain day last winter. That day, he was ordered to leave the capital to handle some matters. As a result, he encountered a top-notch assassin on the way. One of the secret guards by his side was lost. Qin Yu was protected by the remaining secret guard with all his might and finally escaped. However, the two people were still separated on the way to escape. At that time, Qin Yu was also seriously injured. That day, he really thought that he was going to die in the wilderness. As a result, a cyan-clothed young girl fell from the sky and pulled him back from the edge of life and death. At that time, Qin Yu's consciousness was fuzzy, but he still saw the face of the young girl who applied medicine on him and took care of him. She was Shin Qingjin. Sometimes, the heart only moved for a short moment. Before Qin Yu completely lost consciousness, he vaguely saw Shin Qingjin's gentle and deep gaze as she seriously and attentively wrapped the gauze around his wound. At that time, she was leaning over his head, her soft hair lightly sweeping across Qin Yu's face. That gentle sweep also swept into the depths of his heart. The carriage stopped outside the entrance of Marquis Qingchuan Fu for a while. Finally, Qin Yu still put down the curtain and ordered the driver to drive back to his Wangfu. The rain became heavier and heavier. A young girl dressed in black quietly stood in the middle of the long street. Her black hair was already drenched by the rain, but she still stood in the same place as before, blankly looking at the direction Qin Yu's carriage left in. Zhui Shui, go back. Your mission is over. A hoarse male voice came from behind. In the blue mist, a dreamlike figure gradually condensed into a tall figure beside Zhui Shui. Chasing mist. Zhui Shui turned around and stared at the man beside her. I am not a qualified secret guard. I was moved by the goal of my mission. Zhui Shui smiled and didn't say that sentence. Once she said it, she really couldn't turn back. According to the rules of Prince Jin's mansion, the traitor will die. Although she fell in love with someone she shouldn't have, Zhui Shui still remembered her mission in this life. Protect His Highness and obey His Highness' orders. Her life didn't belong to her. So what did she have to hope for love? Chapter 129. When night fell, the spring rain, which had lasted for several hours, finally stopped. When Su Rue returned to the dormitory from the study, Su Wan had already fallen asleep. Perhaps it was because his performance on the wedding day was too fierce, causing a certain Wang Ye to be vegetarian these days. General Su felt unhappy, but his wife did not cooperate, forcing it would destroy the relationship between husband and wife. Su Rue sat on the bed and looked at Su Wan, who was sleeping soundly. His gaze stopped on her rosy lips for a few seconds. Su Rue narrowed his eyes and suddenly leaned over to kiss Su Wan's lips. Then, he quickly lifted his face. All right, not giving meat to eat. Drinking some soup is also very good on the spring night after the rain. Su Wan slept very peacefully, while a certain Wang Ye, who was bursting with energy, tossed and turned the whole night. One moment he would ravage his wife's little mouth. The next moment he would secretly touch his wife's smooth and tender skin. In short, a certain person was entertaining himself, leaving a bunch of small strawberries on Su Wan's body. He really was quite strenuous the next morning. When Su Wan opened her eyes, she found that her mouth was numb. She frowned and touched her somewhat swollen lips with her fingertips. Her complexion immediately became colorful. As a legal husband and wife, Su Wan actually did not mind properly fulfilling the duties of husband and wife, but General Su was really unreliable in this aspect. Once he did it, he completely disregarded Su Wan's feelings. In short, a certain person's skills in bed needed to be honed, and some fierce and intense exercises must be stopped in moderation. Su Wan rubbed her lips and turned to look at the man who was sleeping soundly beside her. She secretly grinded her teeth. Su Rue, have you been too idle recently? A certain person who was pretending to be asleep. Seeing that Su Rue continued to pretend to be asleep, Su Wan didn't bother with him and continued to mind her own business. If you really have enough energy and nowhere to vent, then you should do more meaningful things. For example, help Chun-Ching Yao find an imperial family's fiancé. I think it's time for her to get married. Hearing Su Wan talk about proper business, Su Rue finally slowly opened his eyes. I've already chosen the candidate. Since you think the time is ripe, I'll let him go to Marquis Qingchuan Fu to propose marriage. Oh, willing to wake up? Su Wan turned her head, leaned sideways and glanced at Su Rue. Beloved concubine, wife. Su Rue widened his eyes and put on a pitiful expression to look at Su Wan. This expression somehow made Su Wan think of Su Xiaosu. General Su. Acting cute is shameful. Humph. Su Wan coldly snorted at Su Rue and then turned around, minding her own business and putting on her coat. I'll help you put it on. Su Rue, who was behind her, had always been quick. Seeing that Su Wan wanted to change clothes, he immediately snatched the coat from Su Wan's hands. General Su would never miss such an opportunity to touch his wife in broad daylight. General Su, you're really done. At the end of the third month, Hunan Wang's heir apparent, Qin Xiang, brought a matchmaker and personally went to Marquis Qingchuan Fu to propose marriage to Chen Jia's second young miss, Chen Qingyao. To Marquis Qingchuan Fu that had been depressed for many days, this was undoubtedly an extremely joyous occasion. On that day, Shunshe held a banquet to keep Qin Xiang in the Fu for dinner before leaving. As for Madame Yu, she was naturally very satisfied with the handsome and extraordinary heir of the King of Hunan. This marriage made her grin so wide that she was unable to close her mouth. And as the person involved, Chen Qingyao, although she was a black-bellied, scheming little lowly, in terms of feelings, she was a blank. The young Chun Qingyao always felt that she was living in Chun Qingjin's shadow. She even thought that if Chen Qingjin had a beloved man in the future, she would definitely snatch him over by hook or by crook. This way, she would feel happy. But now, Chen Qingjin had clearly been given the cold shoulder by her father. In the aristocratic circle of the imperial capital, her reputation was also swept to the ground. Like this, she was no longer the daughter of Qin Fu that she needed to secretly envy and be jealous of. Actually, the Qin Qingyao at this time was a bit confused. Regarding Qin Xiang, she couldn't say that she hated him nor did she like him that much. But at Chun Jia's banquet, seeing Chun Qingjin staring at her with that secretly fierce and envious gaze, Chun Qingyao's mood immediately became refreshed. As long as she could make Chen Qingjin unhappy, she would really be happy. So the female lead and supporting female are really creatures that love and kill each other. On this day, Marquis Qingchuan Fu's banquet continued until late at night. At the end of the song, people dispersed and somewhat wearily returned to their boudoir. Chen Qingjin dismissed the servant girls at her side and smashed everything that could be smashed in the room. She was unwilling. Why should people like Su Wan and Chen Qingyao be able to obtain happiness in this lifetime? Based on what? Chen Qingjin, who was almost overwhelmed by the anger and unwillingness at the bottom of her heart, had a malevolent look in her eyes. She firmly bit her lips. She will definitely not let Chen Qingyao have an easy time. Absolutely not. If you want to destroy it, you must first make it crazy. Chen Qingjin, who had already sunk into madness, had long disregarded the suspicion and jealousy she had towards the other servant girls at her side. She still used the method she used to deal with Suwon last time. She used her own name to send a letter to Qin Ting, and used Qin Xiang's name to ask Qin Qingyao to go out and meet. The room where the two people met had long been properly arranged by Chen Qingjin. She had prepared a strong aphrodisiac. This time, Chen Qingjin had been hiding in the dark and quietly observing. She wanted to see Chen Qingyao's end with her own eyes. But unfortunately, the script did not play out according to Chen Qingjin's expectations. When the appointed time arrived, the person who came to the appointment changed from Qin Ting to Qin Yu. How could it be the second highness? Seeing Qin Yu step into the room that she had designed with her own eyes, Chen Qingjin was about to go out to stop him. At this time, Qin Qingyao had already arrived. Seeing the brightly dressed Qin Qingyao, Chen Qingjin's raised footsteps paused. As long as she could destroy Qin Qingyao's marriage, what did it matter who that man was? She wouldn't care. Living again, what else could she care about and lose? Seeing the two people enter the room with her own eyes, Qin Qingyao's heart gradually relaxed. She actually also used Qin Qingyao's name to invite Qin Xiang, but the time was a bit later. Although this scheme was clumsy, it could produce immediate results. Chen Qingjin really wanted to see what kind of expression Qin Qingyao's face would have when Qin Xiang ran into her scandal. Bang! Just as Chen Qingjin was inwardly proud of herself, the door of the room was suddenly knocked open from the inside. Chen Qingjin, who was hiding in the dark, stared blankly. The moment she raised her eyes, she saw Qin Yu with an unkind expression rushing out. This man, gazing at the direction that Qin Yu left. Chen Qingjin's heart was somewhat complicated at this time. She had been betrayed by Qin Ting. In her heart, all men in the world were heartless people who were easily bewitched by beauty. She didn't expect that in front of beauty, Qin Yu could brush his body and leave. Qin Yu was a person worth entrusting, but right now, Chen Qingjin had no time to think. Right now, there was only Chen Qingyao left in the room. Waiting for Qin Xiang to come, wouldn't it be easy for them? Chen Qingjin hesitated for a moment, but in the end, she still boldly walked out from the dark. She cautiously and slowly walked to the door of the room and stuck her head out from the side to look inside. At this time, the door of the entire room was wide open, but the room was empty. How could it be like this? Chen Qingjin was startled. She subconsciously rushed into the room. The fragrance in the room had long dispersed, and Chen Qingyao, who should have been in the room, had disappeared without a trace. Jie, are you looking for me? A mellow and pleasant voice suddenly came from behind her. Chen Qingjin slowly turned around, and in the next moment, her entire body froze in place. Chen Qingyao stood outside the door with a smile on her face. Beside her stood two tall and slender figures. It was impressively Qin Yu and Chen Yushu. Qingjin, I didn't think that you would really be so vicious. Chen Yushu looked at his younger sister with a face full of grief. Why did his most beloved younger sister become like this now? Where did that Qingjin who had no shrewdness in her heart go? Go, big brother, listen to me. Seeing Chen Yushu's figure, Chen Qingjin panicked. She quickly rushed in front of Chen Yushu, wanting to explain to him, but Chen Yushu coldly shook off her hand. You don't need to quibble anymore. I don't have a younger sister like you. Suwon's matter was originally a knot in Chen Yushu's heart. Now that he saw Chen Qingjin use the same old trick to frame his other younger sister, Chen Yushu really gave up on this younger sister of his. There was already nothing worthy of his concern and nostalgia in this imperial capital. He should leave. Seeing Chen Yushu turn around and leave without the slightest hesitation, Chen Qingjin froze in place, tears involuntarily sliding down her face. Gidge, in this life, am I going to lose even you? After Chen Yushu left, Chen Qingyao also followed and left. The current Chen Qingjin was no longer that naive and unaffected eldest young miss of Chunjia. The woman in front of her who was muddled by hatred and whose mind was filled with schemes and revenge was no longer worthy of Chen Qingyao's envy and jealousy. When Chen Qingjin returned to her senses, only Qin Yu remained in front of her. Why haven't you left? Even the second highness intends to ridicule me? Chen Qingjin looked at the man in front of her, her gaze filled with coldness. Qin Yu didn't speak. only using his attentive gaze to look at the person in front of him whose face was covered with tears. I don't know why you want to do such a thing. If you are unhappy in Chunjia, I will marry you. I will marry you. These 3 words sounded in Chen Qingjin's ears like a clap of thunder. She looked at the man in front of her in disbelief. Only after a long time did Chen Qingjin find her voice and somewhat trembled as she opened her mouth to ask, "Why? Why?" Qin Yu was somewhat absent-minded, just because his heart was moved for a split second. Even if he knew that she had done such a despicable thing, he was still willing to tolerate her. Just because she was the first woman that he, Qin Yu, fell in love with. The spring wind blew steeply and the chill was thick. When everyone had left this place of trouble, an enormous white tiger unhurriedly came out from the woods not far away. A certain Tiger King who was finally able to come out of the Wangfu to let loose once expressed that hiding in the woods to peep and whatnot was not Bin Wang's style. Only you humans would be this immoral. Truly too immoral. Right now, following at the white tiger's side, 2 immoral figures leisurely appeared. Both of them were draped in heavy cloaks. Today's big play, although Chen Qingjin personally wrote the script and she also put in a lot of effort to play the role of the tragic female lead, the real director and planner were Su Wan and Su Rue. After today's matter, Chen Qingjin had no way of continuing to stay in Marquis Qingchuan Fu. Right now, Qin Yu was Chen Qingjin's only salvation. Such a powerful and affectionate man, when she was in the most difficult and most dire straits, extended his hand to her. This was the beauty in a hopeless situation, but that if one day, Qin Yu discovered that the Chen Qingjin he loved was actually not the real Chen Qingjin, who knows how he would feel. A person's feelings were fragile and would shatter with a touch, but at the same time, they were hard and indestructible. I love you, only because that person is you. I love you, not other people, also only because at that time, at that place, the person I met was you, not other people. Just like Su Wan and Su Rue, the beginning of every segment of fate was accidental, but also inevitable. Just like Qin Yu, this kind of good man who had the halo of a romantic male lead, his heart would only be moved once in his lifetime. Chen Qingyao and Qin Xiang's marriage was originally set at the end of the 4th month, but the Second Highness suddenly proposed marriage to Chen Jia and disrupted Chen Jia's arrangements. The 2 people's wedding had no choice but to be postponed. Chen Jia's 2 daughters married into the imperial family one after the other. This should have been a matter worthy of celebration, but the decline of Marquis Qingchuan Fu also started from this year. On the day Chen Qingjin married, Chen Yushu had already brought his army to the border. Towards his own younger sister, towards the imperial capital, he had already given up on the night of the wedding. Chen Qingjin was like the first time she got married, nervously waiting for her husband. But for the entire night, Qin Yu did not take a step into the bridal chamber. The next day, Chen Qingjin heard from the mommy of the Wangfu that assassins had infiltrated the Wangfu last night and Wang Ye was almost assassinated. And at the critical moment of life and death, it was a black-clothed young lady who saved Wang Ye. Because of this, that young lady had been seriously injured and unconscious, and Wang Ye had been guarding her bedside without taking off his clothes. He had already guarded her for the entire night. 3 years later, Qin Mu Feng, whose body had always been robust, suddenly contracted a serious illness and passed away. Crown Prince Qin Yu ascended the throne according to his will. The new emperor ascended the throne and the court was in turmoil. The once declining Marquis Qingchuan Fu was suddenly put in an important position by the emperor. Many people did not know the inside story, but the people in the imperial family who were well-versed in information knew the secret inside. It turned out that Chen Jia's eldest young miss, Chen Qingjin, who had married the second prince 3 years ago, was said to have never been favored in the Wangfu. The second prince had never even consummated the marriage with her. But under this premise, a year ago, Chen Sufei suddenly became pregnant. The existence of this child was simply an insult to the imperial family. According to the rules of the imperial family, Chen Qingjin and her child would undoubtedly die. But in the end, the emperor summoned the second prince and the crown prince together into the palace. The father and son trio talked for a long time, and in the end, the lives of Chen Qingjin and the child in her belly were saved. The affairs of the world were so wonderful. With Su Wan and Su Rue's plan, The male lead Qin Yu fell in love with Zhue Shui. Since then, he did not pay any attention to the female lead, treating her as nothing. But this also could not stop the female lead's exceptionally attractive cheat halo. In the end, Qin Qingjin, who was unwilling to be left out, still successfully paired up with one of the male supporting characters, the Crown Prince. The so-called past life and this life, everything was like a joke. Qin Qingjin was unwilling to accept that in her past life, she was crowned with the crime of adultery. She was even more unwilling for the child in her belly to be called a vile spawn. And in this life, everything was chosen by herself. Even if she felt that her conscience was clear, that she and the Crown Prince were truly in love, and that she and Qin Yu simply did not have the reality of a husband and wife. Even if she had thousands and tens of thousands of reasons, but in the eyes of the world, she was still that red-sleeved, fickle, and shameless woman. The Crown Prince ascended to the throne and granted amnesty to the world. The other princes in the capital had already made plans to be exiled from the capital. But at this time, a mysterious army suddenly appeared outside the capital. The leader of this army was impressively Qin Hao. In 3 years, Qin Hao had already been reborn with Su Rui's help and controlled his own troops. This time, he wanted to use his own strength to personally take back the great rivers and mountains that should have belonged to his royal father. Standing on the highest observation tower in the capital, seeing the soldiers outside the city walls, Su Wan couldn't help but clench Su Rui's hand. The day Qin Hao breaks into the city, let's leave. In the same generation of the imperial family, the only person who could contend against Qin Hao was Qin Yu. And now, because of Zhue Shui's relationship, Qin Yu had already formed an alliance with Su Rui and secretly reached an agreement with Qin Hao. Therefore, when Qin Hao's army attacked the capital, the day of the new emperor being abolished was just around the corner. Once the new emperor died, Qin Qingjin would lose her hard-won true love. Then, Su Wan's mission this time would also be perfectly completed. Hearing Su Wan's words, Su Rui couldn't help but hold Su Wan's hand. Then he coughed and whispered in Su Wan's ear that, "Recently I've read a lot of books. Before leaving, I'll accompany you to bathe again. Okay? This time, I absolutely won't hurt you." Su Wan. Glancing at Su Rui, Su Wan couldn't help but pinch his palm. "This is what you said, you can't act recklessly again." As a result, many days later, when blood flowed like a river in the capital, Jin Qinwang Fu's heavily guarded inner courtyard, which was like a paradise, was instead a scene of boundless spring. Stop, I can't take it anymore. I'm going to die. What happened to the promised improvement in skills? What happened to the promise not to get hurt? In the dense mist, Su Rui's eyes were gloomy and Su Wan's voice was still hoarse from shouting. She knew it would be this result. But seeing that he endured for so long, even if it was more painful, she wouldn't refuse him at this time. In the dead of night, when Su Rui finally kissed the corner of Su Wan's lips with satisfaction, Su Wan weakly smiled at him. Only then did she contact headquarters in her heart, preparing to withdraw from the mission. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.